few months ago in a maze, a young boy trembling with anxiety recounted that those who didn't choose to retreat immediately when confronted by the boss, or those greedy individuals who prioritized personal gain, were met with death. The boy looked around and saw injured people lying scattered on the ground. He went on to say that this was exactly what he had seen, and wondered if they were still alive when a monster appeared before him. The monster stood opposite the boy and stared at him, making him think it was the floor boss, and he trembled with fear. He recalled that the injured had been knocked unconscious with just one blow from the monster. The boy said that with just one blow, everyone was knocked out. That was the power of the floor boss. They needed to get out of here, but he didn't know how. He wondered whether he should flee while taking the other three with him, or try to buy time until rescue arrived, but then realized neither option was feasible. He thought there was only one way left. He had to prepare himself and call himself Whim Strauss. Whim then used Switch Puppenspieler, and he thought that after finishing his spell he could escape alone. That thought flashed through his mind. The dragon's wings. They had accepted someone like him as a teammate, and he had acquired them. He thought about all the days he had spent with them. The monster lunged to attack, while Whim continued to think that this was the most important moment of his life, and he felt a little proud that he had thought of it that way. At the Dragon's Wings house, the other members cornered Whim. Meanwhile, Whim, trembling, asked them why, and said that something strange was happening. The male member told Whim not to make him repeat himself, then drew his sword and pointed it at him. This male member is Kronos, the leader of Dragon's Wings, and he further told Whim that he had told him to get lost. Nikor, the priest, said that was obvious, while Mylis, the sorceress, remarked that Whim had truly gotten the better side this time. Nikor went on to say that just because Whim delivered the final blow to take down the floor boss, he was acting like a hero. At this point, Kronos told Whim that it was his magic sword, and Mylis' magic that had cornered the boss, and then asked him if he considered it his own achievement. Whim stammered nervously, saying he'd never thought of it that way, that it was a victory for the whole group. He recounted how he'd miraculously defeated the floor boss. It truly was a miracle. He thought everyone would praise him. Whim wondered why things had come to this point, while Mylis remarked that his buffs were truly lacking, a point Kronos agreed with, saying it was all Whim's fault, leaving him utterly disappointed. He thought that from the very beginning, they had never truly accepted him. He knelt down and said he was sorry for what he had done. But Dragon's Wings is the only place he has. No one else will hire a grand tour like him. He'll do his best not to cause any more trouble. So please let him stay. This is the only place he belongs. Kronos stared at Whim. Then he replied, "Then do it this way. If you can beat him in a fight, he'll let you stay." Whim was shocked to hear that and thought, how could someone who isn't a professional fighter like me possibly defeat a warrior like Kronos? Whim muttered that he would need another miracle and forced a nervous smile. Kronos became furious, shouting at the boy what he was laughing at. Then he grabbed Whim by the neck and shoved him against the wall, causing Whim to groan in pain. Kronos yelled that he was a useless person who only knew how to use a few low-level buffs. So you shouldn't disobey the leader's orders. Nikor anxiously tried to dissuade Kronos, warning him that if he continued, things would get worse, but before she could finish, she was interrupted when Kronos threw Whim to the ground and berated him, calling him a weakling. Kronos cursed angrily and wondered how on earth such a weakling could have defeated the floor boss. Sitting slumped on the floor, Whim coughed incessantly and thought that even though he had risked his life for them, the members of Dragon's Wings, those who had taken him in when he was just a menial worker, he simply wanted to repay them. At that moment, a girl walked into the room, leaving Whim bewildered and unsure of what was happening. The girl stared at Whim, while he, bewildered, asked her who she was. Kronos then introduced her as Sophia, who would be joining the team in his place. He added that she would be a valuable asset to fill the void that Whim would leave. Kronos held Whim by the head and kept insisting that he not be made to repeat himself. Then he flashed a cruel smile and told Whim to get out, that they didn't need him anymore. Whim was completely stunned, speechless. Whim then recounted that Full Brown was a labyrinthine city, a place that held the dreams and hopes of young adventurers. A city thrives on the gifts that come from the labyrinth, and on the people who venture into it in search of them. A vendor was explaining to a customer that this magic stone was a top-grade material, sourced from the 60th floor. Whim went on to recount that the labyrinth was filled with treasures of gold and silver and rare monster materials. And there are landscapes that cannot be found on the surface. The dangerous and unexplored areas of the labyrinth are endless. Fame and status are directly proportional to pioneering achievements, something that is certain to come to those who venture forth. And the bond between those who have crossed the line between life and death together is stronger than even blood ties. Those who dare to risk their lives to explore the labyrinth are called explorers. Thinking about being banished by Kronos, Whim muttered that he wished he could die. He knew for sure that there were still jobs at the Adventurers Guild, but the job of a Grand Tour wasn't in high demand, and he doubted any crew would hire him at this time. You could hunt some weak monsters like in the old days. No, maybe some mid-tier team would accept you. No, you shouldn't think too highly of yourself. A rank F team would probably be a better fit. Whim stopped in front of a pub, pulled a few coins out of his pocket, and told himself that at times like these, he had to drink. He walked into the shop, and someone inside greeted him. Inside, a bartender smiled when she recognized Whim, who greeted her back. "Good afternoon, Greta." Greta said she heard that Dragon's Wings had just defeated a floor boss, and congratulated him, then offered him a glass of wine. The others in the bar also congratulated Whim and asked him, the world #1, if he was planning to treat them to a meal today. Greta cheerfully added that if the Adventurers Guild confirmed the results of the boss-killing operation at the scene, she believed he would be promoted to a higher-level squad, and then asked if he was celebrating today. But Whim just shook his head and replied, no. He forced a smile and said that for now he just wanted a beer and sausages as usual. While eating, Whim thought the food wasn't very good, probably because of what had happened, and then he chuckled softly. But then he quickly covered his mouth with his hand. Whim recalled that he wasn't allowed to laugh like that. Kronos had told him to stop because it looked disgusting. But Whim was no longer a member of Dragon's Wings. He looked around the cafe, recalling how the whole group used to celebrate together, but he himself wasn't good at striking up conversations with others. Even so, he realized that it had been really fun at the time. Now there was no place for him there anymore. Thinking that, he bowed his head and buried his face in the plate. Greta looked at Whim anxiously, but suddenly the doorbell rang and someone called his name. A girl entered through the pub door and approached him, while Whim, astonished, called out her name as Haida Marie and wondered why she was there. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild, a man reported to the guildmaster that they had examined the body of the floor leader, commonly known as the giant crocodile who had been defeated by the Dragon's Wings team. The leader asked about the situation, and the man replied that, according to reports, all 4 members of the group had joined forces to defeat the monster. However, the chairman asked if there was any problem. The man explained that they had examined the wounds on the gang leader's body, and that most of the injuries, including the finishing blow, were caused by a machete. This person added that there were also wounds caused by magic and swords, but he didn't think those were serious enough to cause serious injury. Upon hearing this, the guildmaster remarked that the only member of Dragon's Wings who used a machete was Whim Strauss. Then the guildmaster asked the man if he meant that a non-professional fighter, a Grand Tour, had defeated a floor boss using only his own strength. Some time ago, Haida Marie sat alone looking at a map and wondering why Whim's location marker had moved away from Dragon's Wings to a cheap inn. She asked for the location of the listening device, then picked it up and said, "Here it is," before activating it. Kronos' voice recorder was shouting, "Get out, you piece of trash," enraging Haida Marie, who exclaimed, "How dare Kronos speak like that to her Whim?" Back in the present, Haida Marie calls out Whim's name while Greta greets her. Greta suspiciously asked if this was the stalker girl, S-chan, which angered Haida Marie. She insisted she wasn't S-chan, but Haida Marie, even though her name didn't have an S, and then called Greta the cowherd girl. Greta, confused, asked, "What does herding cows mean?" and seemed not to understand the implication, which irritated Haida Marie, who retorted, "Go die." Then she said that she hadn't come here for that reason, and then turned to ask Whim if he was okay. Whim wondered if she was referring to Dragon's Wings and asked Haida Marie if the rumors had already spread. She replied that she hadn't and that only she knew. Whim then asked how she knew about it. Haida Marie replied that she knew everything about Whim. This completely shocked him, and he asked her how she knew. Haida Marie explained that it was because they came from the same village. Whim pondered for a moment, then said that perhaps that made sense. Greta asked Haida Marie if anything was wrong, and if anything had happened to Whim, but Haida Marie hesitated and didn't say anything. Whim felt embarrassed and awkwardly said that he really didn't know what to say, but he had actually been kicked out of Dragon's Wings. The people in the pub overheard it by chance, and were all surprised. One man asked why he was kicked out when his team was almost certain to be promoted. Another said he was just doing menial tasks, while another commented that he had heard about the other 3, but hadn't heard anything about Whim since. Whim replied that they hadn't even given him time to prepare. but he had kept the paperwork ready in case he needed it, so he thought everything would be fine. He also said that Sophia seemed good at it, and that she might finally be able to do what he had done. Hidemarie asks Whim about Sophia and whether she is his replacement. Whim confirms and says that she is a beautiful fairy. Hidemarie angrily says that Kronos has yet another girl, but Whim asks her not to say so and admits that it's probably true. Whim thinks that the atmosphere at the time actually suggested it. If only he could have built up a little more self-confidence, perhaps things would have been different. He chuckled softly, which caught Hidemarie's attention, and she asked him if he still hadn't broken that habit. Whim was confused, and Hidemarie noted that his laughter made her uncomfortable. Whim quickly apologized and asked her if it was disgusting, but she replied that it wasn't. Hidemarie went on to say that she liked his laugh and remembered how he used to correct her mistakes. Hearing this, Whim asked her what she meant, telling her that she shouldn't express her feelings for someone so easily. He asked her what if he misunderstood. Hidemarie blushed and replied that it was fine if he thought so, then continued eating her food. Whim took a big gulp of beer and told Hidemarie to stop. But Hidemarie commented that she didn't understand why Whim was expelled, saying that he had defeated the floor boss all by himself. Whim nearly choked upon hearing this and wondered what Hidemarie meant. Hidemarie explained that normally Dragon's Wings wouldn't be able to defeat the floor boss, yet he had done it. Could he be the one who had done it? Whim was shocked to hear this and shouted that it was a misunderstanding, that he was only the one delivering the finishing blow. Whim added that he thought it was just a coincidence that he defeated the boss, all thanks to the others who had inflicted damage on it. However, Hidemarie said that she didn't think so. She explained that it was just her speculation, but she didn't think the floor boss had taken any damage other than Whim's attacks. Therefore, defeating the floor boss could be considered Whim's solo achievement. Whim exclaimed, "No, that's impossible. Hidemarie is overestimating me." The other three were all exceptionally talented, and he was simply trying his best not to cause them any trouble. Whim wondered why Hidemarie thought so highly of him. Hidemarie replied that she thought so because... But Greta interrupted her, calling Hidemarie S-chan. Greta said that she was born and raised in Full Brown, and had never heard of anyone being able to defeat the floor boss alone. Greta added that Hidemarie shouldn't use her stalking habit to fabricate stories and say strange, unpleasant things. Hearing this, Hidemarie angrily shouted, "What?" Then asserted that she said that because she had overheard the conversation through a listening device. Greta responded that she had gone too far. Seeing Greta and Hidemarie arguing, Whim spoke up to explain that the reason he was expelled was his own fault and a loss of trust. This only angered Hidemarie further, and she yelled at Whim to stop his weak-willed attitude. Turning to Greta, she called her the cowherd girl and then loudly demanded a glass of beer. Greta mentioned that Hidemarie wasn't a good drinker, but Hidemarie retorted that she didn't care and demanded that he pour her some immediately. Greta put her beer glass down and commented that she was starting again. Then, Hidemarie, with a glass of wine in her hand, began to speak about the conflicting perceptions within her. Soon she collapsed, her face pressed against the table. Then Greta told Hidemarie that she had only finished her first glass, but Hidemarie yelled at her to shut up and gave her another glass. Whim said that was enough drinking for the day, but Hidemarie told him to take this and handed him a card. Whim looked at the card, while Hidemarie explained that it was her business card. In his mind, Whim immediately thought of Nacht Libelle, the strongest high-ranking team in Full Brown, comprised of members of high status, and of course, with an extremely rigorous selection process. Hidemarie was recruited there and quickly made a name for himself early in his career. She told Whim that he should come to their team's house tomorrow. Whim asked what she wanted him to do. Hidemarie told him to try working with them for a while just to gain experience, and she would vouch for him. Whim was astonished and asked if she could really do that. Hidemarie replied that although they didn't look alike, she was the 74th sage and also a candidate for the next high-ranking leadership position, so it was simple for her. It was dark outside, shrouded in darkness, and Hidemarie was lying on Whim's back. He thanked Greta for the meal while she asked if he was okay and if he should use his body enhancement, which made Whim laugh. He replied that Grantor was indeed weak, but that wasn't a problem. Then Greta warned him that there were many drunken adventurers walking around at this hour, so he should be careful. Whim replied that he would be mindful. Whim walked down the street, muttering to himself that even though Hidemarie was willing to vouch for him, he wondered if someone like him was suitable to join Nacht Libelle. He had a feeling the other members of the group would have a bad impression of him if he actually did. Whim added that he was sure someone like him would only cause trouble there, and eventually Hidemarie might end up hating him. Suddenly, Whim saw two men in front of him smashing bottles. One of them said he hadn't hit a single one and was drinking alcohol. The other person commented that when it was his turn, he also missed, while Whim started to walk past. But when the men saw Whim passing by, one of them stopped and asked him what he was and what he was carrying. The man suddenly recognized Haida Marie and exclaimed that he knew it. She was the thief from the other day. Whim was shocked to hear this and asked, "Thief?" The man explained that Haida Marie had bought all the snow cakes they had been waiting in line for at the store. The other man shouted that there were even limited edition ones among them. Hearing this, Whim thought that he was very sorry about it, but calling her a thief was a bit much. One of the two men yelled at Whim, telling him to wake her up immediately and demanding an apology. Whim was confused and didn't know what to do, while the man continued to yell, asking why he was so quiet, and the other man asked if he didn't understand what they were saying. When one of the two men tried to touch Haida Marie and yelled at him to wake her up, Whim immediately used his pump-up Zweimal, instant enhancement skill ×2, and disappeared from his current location. The two men were bewildered, not knowing what had happened. One of them asked, "Where did he go?" But immediately they saw Whim appear on the stairs above. Whim bowed his head in apology on behalf of Haida Marie for what she had done, saying that she had also shared some of the snow cake with him that day. The two men were stunned, and Whim thought to himself, "This is bad. They seem even angrier." He quickly excused himself and left. At that moment, the other two began talking about Haida Marie, realizing that she was from Nacht Libelle, the girl with the two braids. One person asked the other if they had seen what the boy had just done, but the other said they hadn't and wondered if the boy was also a member of Nacht Libelle. While escaping from the two drunk men, Whim stopped and breathed a sigh of relief, saying that they were indeed drunk, but since he had made it this far, they should be all right. When Whim heard Haida Marie whispering something, he asked if she was awake and if she could walk. Haida Marie replied that she couldn't walk, which made Whim smile and remember her promise to take care of him, so he could just take his time and continue walking. Just a few hours earlier at the pub, Whim had thought that someone like him joining Nacht Libelle was a far-fetched idea. Haida Marie is a strong candidate for the next high-level leadership position, and what's more, she possesses a rare profession, sage. She's a good person, always chatting with someone like you. He couldn't cause her any more trouble, but Haida Marie grabbed Whim's shoulder and told him to go ahead, which surprised him. She went on to say that Whim has unlimited potential, and that if he joined Nacht Libelle, he would discover who he truly is. She added that he should live his life the way he wants. Returning to the present, Whim thanked Haida Marie for being there for him during his most difficult time. He said he wasn't sure if he should say this, but Haida Marie should also live freely. She doesn't need to feel any responsibility or obligation towards him. Hearing this, she called out his name and insisted that it wasn't like that she wasn't doing this out of any sense of obligation or debt. Whim then asked what their relationship was. Haida Marie awkwardly replied that it would be best if Whim didn't find out. He asked confused why, and she replied that it was because she knew everything about him, which stunned Whim. Nacht Libelle is the highest-ranking group with over 100 members, and 30% of the floor managers have been defeated by this group. Whim paced anxiously back and forth in front of Nacht Libelle's headquarters, wondering if it was really okay for him to be here. A man noticed him and thought there was a suspicious person lurking nearby. The man approached and asked what he needed, causing Whim to start trembling and feel awkward, not knowing what to say. Worried, Whim took something out of his pocket, making the man think it was a weapon, so he immediately prepared to fight. But then Whim just pulled out a business card and said that Haida Marie had given it to him. The man was taken aback when he saw the card and hesitantly asked if he was a friend of Haida Marie's. Shortly afterwards, Haida Marie appeared and welcomed Whim to Nacht Libelle, while Whim was surprised by the sight inside. He thought to himself that this place was amazing, more like a mansion than a team's home. Haida Marie showed him where the dining hall was, where the training room was, and as for that other place. But before she could finish, another person approached. It was the same man from earlier. He apologized for what had happened, and said that Whim didn't look like the picture he'd been told about him. Whim replied that it was all right, that it was his fault for looking suspicious. But the man refused to take responsibility and insisted that he was not at fault at all. Haida Marie then called the man by the name Abel and asked him how he could have made such a mistake. Abel replied that it was because she had called him a courageous man. Haida Marie blushed and shouted that she had never said that. She swore she hadn't said it at all. In embarrassment, she awkwardly walked toward a door and told Whim that the entrance was this way. Then she and Whim entered a crowded hall with many people already inside. Approaching a woman, Marie cheerfully said that she had brought Whim along and called her Camila. Camila smiled and said she understood. Whim thought to himself that this woman was the leader of Nacht Libelle, the silver-haired Camila. She is one of the strongest warriors in Fullbrow. Camila approached Whim and remarked that he was smaller than she had expected. Immediately afterwards, she covered her mouth and said that it was impolite to say that, because she had heard that he was a handsome and masculine young man. Marie instantly shouted in embarrassment that she hadn't said that at all. Camila then welcomed Whim to Nacht Libelle, and Whim shook her hand, introducing himself as a former member of Dragon's Wings who had been laid off. His name was Whim Strauss. He said he was very happy to meet her, and secretly thought that the strength of her handshake was incredible. Camila said that Marie had told her about him, and that at Nacht Libelle they always welcome talented people. However, when Camila asked what role he played at Dragon's Wings, Whim became worried and replied that because he didn't have much mana, he usually did general tasks like searching for enemies, administrative work, and other miscellaneous tasks. Camila was puzzled by this. Administrative work? Marie quickly said that he didn't need to tell unnecessary things, but Whim insisted that it was true. Camila smiled and said that this time they were just scouting for the upcoming dive, and she would need him behind to observe and spot enemies. Whim froze when he heard the word dive and shouted, asking what was happening. Marie then reminded him that she had already told him. This was for him to gain experience. Whim panicked, shouting that this was too soon. He had never gone on a dive with so many people before, but Marie reassured them that everything would be all right. They just needed to enter the labyrinth. Whim and the others gathered in front of a crystal ball, from which a magic circle formed on the ground. Whim recounts that the labyrinth was navigated using teleportation rings located on each floor. Upon defeating the floor boss, new teleportation points will appear, and depending on the circle used, they may even be able to skip multiple floors at once. As they walked through the labyrinth, Marie suddenly stopped and called out to Whim. She apologized and gave him a scarf, asking him to wear it for a while. Marie explained that they were about to use a special teleportation tunnel that Nacht Libelle was keeping secret. Since Whim was still an outsider, they needed to be blindfolded when passing through it. But Whim interrupted her and said that it was fine, that it was only natural, especially when it came to information about teleportation loops that could skip multiple floors, which was a huge advantage over other teams. After putting on the blindfold, Marie told Whim to follow her and said he should hold her hand. Whim agreed and took her hand. Marie teased that holding her hand in public like this was quite bold. Whim immediately blushed and shouted that it wasn't like that, he hadn't seen anything. Marie replied that she didn't mind, but Whim yelled at her to stop teasing him. Whim recounted that they subsequently used the secret teleportation ring several times. Upon reaching floor 97, Whim thought it was indeed Nacht Libelle. He hadn't expected them to reach this floor so quickly. This was the true power of a high-ranking team. Suddenly, Whim began to worry and said that things weren't good. He didn't think he could be of any help at Nacht Libelle. His abilities were limited. All he ever did at Dragon's Wings was observe and imitate what he heard. With such a large and talented group, he was just a burden. Camila asked what he was muttering about, and Marie explained that he was just nervous because it was his first time, and besides, he was a very cautious person. Camila smiled and said that being cautious was a good thing. Camila took Whim's arm and explained that it wasn't good for him to be so stressed, then called him little boy. Whim agreed awkwardly. She went on to say that he had dived to this floor before with the B-rank team, Dragon's Wings, and moreover, he was the one who had defeated the floor boss before them, so there was no need to worry. She added that the main goal for today was simply to create a map, so he just needed to do what he could. Hearing this, Whim was so moved that tears welled up in his eyes. He softly replied that he understood and thought to himself how kind Camila was, almost making him cry. Marie chimed in, saying that everyone at Nacht Libelle was a good person, so he should take his time getting to know them. Whim nodded in agreement. A moment later, Whim suddenly panicked and hastily turned around to look behind him. Marie anxiously asked if anything was wrong, but he simply replied that nothing was wrong, that he just thought he'd heard something, and that it might just have been his imagination. She asked in astonishment if it was a sign of some kind of trap, then said that she thought he should report it. Whim reassured himself that it wasn't like that there was something strange about this feeling, but he would still expand his search area as a precaution. Whim then used his magic to inspect the entire surrounding area. Marie suggested that if he discovered anything, he should use telepathy to let Camila know, and Whim agreed with her. In another part of the labyrinth, Camila and the other members of her team were descending the stairs. Suddenly she heard Whim's voice, asking permission to disturb her and inquiring if she could spare him some time. Camila asked what was wrong. Whim reported that he suspected there might be a rockfall trap to the upper left, about 45 meters away, just a short distance from them. Camila asked if he was sure about the rockfall trap. Whim replied that he was 90% sure, but there might be a delay in activation. Camila said that she didn't care about the percentage and asked that next time if he detected anything, he should use the public communication channel to inform everyone. Whim agreed, secretly thinking that only large teams had such a team-wide communication system, which made him even more nervous. Shortly afterward, an announcement was made on the public channel stating that a rockfall trap was likely to appear in the front left, with an estimated weight of approximately 150 kilograms, shaped like a stone column. This information came as a complete shock to all the team members. Seeing everyone's surprised reactions, Whim wondered what was going on and whether he had messed things up. Meanwhile, Camila stated publicly that if that were all, Abel could handle it. Abel replied that this was Abel and that he would handle it. Abel approached the suspected trap, and just as he arrived, a large rock fell down. He quickly caught it, preventing himself from being hit. Later, Abel announced on public channels that the trap had been defused. Camila praised him for doing a good job, and she added that the situation perfectly matched the description. The other members of Nacht Libelle were extremely surprised. They asked if it was really possible for him to do that, and said they had never heard of such a trap-detecting ability, let alone predicting its shape. Some people suspected it might just be a coincidence, then wondered if it was the power of one of the people from Dragon's Wings. Whim anxiously asked Marie what he should do, wondering if he had gotten himself into trouble. But Marie confirmed that he had, but in a good way. She said that people were realizing Whim's normality was actually anything but normal. He then went on to search the traps again and again, proving that what happened wasn't just a coincidence. Then, one of the Nacht Libelle members wondered what that guy from Dragon's Wings was up to. Another said it was Jim Strauss, and a third added that he was using his advanced enemy-finding skill as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Camila commented that Dragon's Wings with only 4 members had become a B-tier team in just a few years. She wondered why she had never heard of this boy, despite his advanced search skills, and why he had been expelled. Was there something wrong with him? Just then, Whim's voice came through the communication channel, calling Camila and announcing that it was him. Camila asked him what was wrong, and Whim replied that the humidity was rising. He added that they hadn't seen any lower-level winged insects in a while. Camila asked what that meant, and Whim explained that he believed they had entered the territory of a giant monster. It's very likely the territory of Great Tortoise Zaratan. This is a highly hostile monster, but it's entirely possible to avoid it by taking a slightly longer route. Camila asked if he was sure, and Whim replied that he was 90% certain. Camila told Whim that she knew he was cautious, but as she had said before, when there was a high probability, he should use a public communication channel to report. Hearing this, Whim panicked and quickly apologized to Camila. He thought to himself that he had made another mistake, and he didn't know what to do next. Camila went on to say that she wanted to leave the search to Simon, while Whim stepped forward. She wanted his assistance in the upcoming battle. Hearing this, Whim thought to himself, "Oh no, he's just been removed from the search mission because of his mistake." Camila went on to say that she had decided there was no need to avoid Great Tortoise Zaratan. They would fight it, and she wants to see his potential as a Grand Tour winner. Hearing that, Whim became even more worried, thinking that if he made another mistake this time, there would be nowhere else for him. But he still told Camila that he understood and would try his best. Deep down, Whim sadly thought that he had to make sure he didn't make any more mistakes. At that moment, Marie silently watched him from behind, then opened the communication channel and called Camila. Marie asked Camila if she could accompany Whim and said that she was used to his buffing skills, and no one could support him better than her at this moment. Camila smiled in agreement, saying she was thinking the same thing, and told Marie to go ahead and take good care of him. Whim apologized to Marie for bothering him, but she excitedly said that now was the time for him to show himself. Whim recounted that his ideal in life was to be unassuming, to help others when needed. He lived a secluded life and sought to contribute quietly. That was the path he believed he should take. He glanced furtively at a giant turtle monster ahead with a worried expression. Marie stood next to Whim, urging him to hurry, saying they should act while the turtle was busy eating. She showed him that everyone was watching, and this was the perfect opportunity for him to show them who he really was. Looking towards Camila and the others in the Nacht Libelle crew, Whim thought to himself that they were watching him. To atone for his previous mistake, he had to make sure he didn't cause any more trouble for Nacht Libelle. Whim said that he really didn't know what to do. After just one day of being with everyone, he realized how inexperienced he was at coordinating with such a large group. No matter how hard he tried, he would still make mistakes, especially since Haida Marie had gone to so much trouble for him. She called his name when she saw him falter. Whim started to say that someone like him. But Haida Marie interrupted him, saying that they would use Ice Spear and he just needed to support her by buffing her as usual. She was ready to enter the battle, and Whim thought to himself, yes, this feeling was familiar. They had dived together, just the two of them, before, and he felt relieved. He happily thanked Haida Marie and said that he was fine now. She smiled in response, saying that this was the Whim she knew. She then drew her weapon and declared that it was time to show everyone what they were truly capable of. Whim felt confused and asked Haida Marie if the magic stone was shrinking, to which she explained that she wasn't the only one whose size had decreased, and it also tripled the magical density. Whim exclaimed that it was exactly as he had thought. Haida Marie yelled, "Okay, they should do it," and used the generate spell to attack the monster. The monster stared intently at them, while one of the group exclaimed that the giant turtle had taken notice of them. A spear appeared from above, and Whim began to recount that any mage who didn't understand the situation would be stunned to witness this. Haida Marie's magic is activated based on principles entirely different from common magic today. This is only possible if the user possesses a rare profession called Sage. There are two types of magic: basic magic and applied magic. Basic magic consists of spells that anyone can use, such as transmitting messages, locating enemies, etc. Applied magic, on the other hand, refers to special spells that can only be used depending on one's profession, such as warrior, mage, priest, grantor, etc. Whim went on to recount that sages were considered the most powerful profession because they could use all kinds of magic. Furthermore, they also have the ability to create the basic building blocks of magic to create new spells. At that moment, Haida Marie shouted out her approval. She officially accepted the gift from Grantor Whim Strauss. Whim replied that he accepted and immediately activated the solid and frozen magic, connecting with the spear hovering high above. As the team members watched intently, Camila thought that Whim had enhanced the magic of the attacker's attack. Meanwhile, Whim shouted to activate enchant, and the monster began charging straight towards Whim and Haida Marie. She realized and exclaimed that it was heading in the right direction, then gestured, and Whim responded that he understood. They both shouted Ice Spear, and the Ice Spear pierced through the monster. All the team members were stunned. Meanwhile, a strong gust of cold wind blew through, blurring their vision. The monster was defeated, and Haida Marie shivered, saying it was too cold, causing Whim to quickly apologize, saying that the magical output this time was higher than he expected. Haida Marie told Whim that it was okay because he had finally shown his abilities. Whim asked if she really thought so. Immediately afterwards, Haida Marie shouted, asking Camila what she thought. "Isn't Whim wonderful?" Camila stood still, saying nothing, only gently brushing the dust off her armor. Whim began to worry, wondering if he had done something wrong again. But then Camila spoke up, saying she had just received a message from Simon. He had spotted a wyvern. They would start setting up camp there, and Whim was instructed to use a buff on the shield unit. Camila added that she wanted to see his defensive buffing abilities. Whim replied that he understood. Haida Marie secretly thought she quite liked what she had just witnessed, but Whim disagreed, saying that wasn't the case. Camila was only giving him one more chance, so next time he had to try his best. Haida Marie was slightly disappointed to hear that and complained that he was doing it again. But deep down, she was happy because now, except for him, most people were starting to realize how good Whim really was. So maybe that was okay. At that moment, the other members of the team started whispering, wondering if Haida Marie's Ice Spear had ever been this fast before. One person wondered about that strange grantor, and another replied that he was a friend of Haida Marie. What a peculiar fellow. Haida Marie suddenly stared at both members and asked if they had said anything. They fearfully replied that no, nothing. Then Abel approached Whim and said, "Let me introduce myself. I'm Abel, the squad leader. It's a pleasure to meet you." Whim thought to himself that Abel was the captain, which was amazing considering they were the same age. He replied that it was nice to meet him, But when Whim tried to shake Abel's hand, he started to panic, thinking he couldn't talk to strangers, not knowing what to say next. He pulled his hand back, surprising Abel, who asked if he was all right. Whim replied that he was fine, but inwardly he thought it was a disaster. Abel will find you terrible, will hate you, and then everything will go back to how it was before. However, contrary to expectations, Abel laughed and told him there was no need to be so stressed. That calmed Whim down. He thought to himself that Abel was so kind, and it warmed his heart. Then Abel said that he had heard Whim could strengthen their defenses, and apologized for not having much experience using buffs. Whim retorted that there must be some grand tour at Nacht Libelle. Abel replied that he had heard only one person had ever held that role before. Whim thought to himself, that makes sense, it's not a popular profession after all. Whim then explained that only if he could obtain the buff's approval could the Grand Tour activate the buff on the target. He added that grant magic is a type of magic that operates through consciousness, used to alter physical elements. For example, enhancing physical attributes such as weapons, body, hardness, lightness, strength, speed, or anything that extends beyond human sensation. Whim also added that the buff can only be applied if the target is truly willing to accept it. But then, a man interrupted him, his face stern and somewhat frightening, declaring that he didn't like buffs. This made Whim anxious and frightened. However, the man then said it was impolite to say that and introduced himself as Mark, asking if he could explain further. Mark went on to say that he used to dive with the Grand Tour, and each time he received a buff, his body felt different. There were times when he lost control of his body and couldn't act properly. Often, Grand Tour would also add all sorts of attributes, causing many unwanted effects. Whim was shocked to hear this, but reassured himself that he could only use basic level buffs, so nothing like that would happen. Whim went on to explain that he was using a rather complex combination of different buffs, so there was no need to worry about side effects. However, Mark became angry when he heard that, which frightened Whim. Mark asked if he thought he was a novice, then added that he knew a little about buffs himself, and wanted to hear a more detailed explanation. Whim was anxious and trembling, wondering if he had angered Mark and not knowing what to say next. Abel spoke up, saying that although he didn't have much experience, he wanted to learn and hoped to hear Whim explain things more clearly. Whim thought to himself, that's right, these are adventurers from Nacht Libelle, so it's not surprising that they have knowledge of other professions. He asked if they really wanted to hear it, then told them not to worry, because there would be no change in their feelings. Mark was confused by this, which caused Whim to fall silent for a moment. Mark asked him what he meant by saying there would be no changes, and whether such a buff actually existed. Whim happily replied that it was a characteristic of the Grand Tour skill he possessed, then asked if he was truly allowed to explain it. Mark agreed, and Whim happily said that this was the first time someone had asked him to explain his skills. First, he explained that the discrepancy in the effectiveness of buffs that many people discuss is due to the rusting method, which is a common method used in applied magic. The incantation method, on the other hand, is a way of casting spells where the incantation is fully and clearly established. Whim admitted that he wasn't very familiar with how other classes worked, but that was understandable. Abel interjected, saying that everyone's physical condition and strength are different, while Mark agreed, arguing that it's not something that can be generalized and applied to everyone. Whim smiled and said that, as they said, if one wasn't careful, a wrong buff could cause the recipient to break bones. In his heart, he thought to himself that he already knew. The people from Nacht Libelle were truly amazing. They even understood the principles of Grand Tour magic. Then Whim began chanting, Lorem ispum dolor sit amet, consectatur adipissing illit, and continued reciting everything he knew. Realizing he was talking too much, Whim awkwardly apologized and asked if he had been talking excessively. But Abel, Mark, and the others all smiled and replied that it was all right, perfectly fine. Whim went on to explain that thanks to this special buff skill, he could combine 7 defensive enchantments into a single spell, and even gather all 25 sensory-related enchantments into a single incantation. Hearing this, everyone began to feel tense and confused. Suddenly, Mark shouted that he understood. He really understood. Whim immediately realized that he had once again talked too much. Mark, with a stunned expression, said that it was incredible. Simply put, he could bestow dozens of buffs at once with just one spell. Whim humbly explained that it was a little different from the usual Grand Tours. Because he didn't have much magic power, he had to carefully divide and utilize the limited amount of magic he possessed. Mark said that, to be sure, he confirmed that their feelings would remain the same as usual. Whim replied that the only difference was the feeling that his body was improving. Mark nodded, saying that he understood. Immediately afterward, Mark solemnly read the blessing. I, Mark, approve the blessing of Grantor Whim Strauss. Whim asked in surprise if he was sure, and Mark confirmed this, adding that just that much knowledge alone shows how talented Whim is. Mark trusted him. That's what Whim thought when he heard Mark say that, and he thanked him from the bottom of his heart. Whim shouted that he would do his best, then activated his ultimate magic by summoning Enchant. At this moment, Abel and Mark are fighting. Whim stood watching the two of them, nervously asking how it felt. Mark replied that there was no need to say anything. It was a feeling he couldn't even put into words, his body moving more nimbly than even in his prime. Abel agreed with Mark, exclaiming that his body felt so light it was like a dream, unlike any ordinary buff. Mark shouted to Abel, telling them to try coordinating some kind of move. Meanwhile, the other members of the team yelled at Whim, urging him to hurry up and buff them too. Whim agreed and began casting buffs on each person. Then, standing behind Camila, Whim announced that he had arrived. Camila nodded, saying it was fine, then noticed Whim was trembling and asked if he was okay. Whim replied that it was always like that. Whenever something big was near him, he would tremble like that. Suddenly, a monster appeared, and Camila immediately ordered the entire team to prepare for battle. The monster roared in anger, and Camila warned the shield units that a breath attack was coming. She trusted them, and they all confirmed in unison, ready to fight. The monster spewed fire toward the shield units, but they easily blocked it with their shielding spell. The attack was deflected, causing the flames to bounce back towards the monster. Whim watched the scene in amazement, exclaiming, "That's amazing!" They've used reflection just as expected from Nacht Libelle's shield units. Mark felt tense and asked Abel if they had actually used reflection, and Abel nodded in confirmation that they had, although it might just be a coincidence. Mark then asked if all 5 members of the shield team could do it, and at that moment, a team member shouted that it was his first time succeeding. Mark concluded that it was impossible. It must have been thanks to Whim's buff. Camila then ordered the long-range units to open fire, and they immediately attacked with their Geveter spear skill, aiming directly at the monster. Unfortunately, the attack had no effect on the monster, leading one member of the group to remark that it was ineffective. Camila observed and said that she understood. Whim thought to himself that the monster's body had a layer of anti-magic coating. Its eyes were also different from those of other individuals of the same species, and he wondered if this was a subvariant. Camila then stated that this appeared to be a rare subspecies of the wyvern, a unique variant, and Whim agreed with that assessment. On public, Camila quickly asked everyone to step back and declared that it was her turn now. Abel announced that he would leave the rest to Camila, and she nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, she thought about the counterattack skill the shield units had just demonstrated. A secret technique reserved only for those in defensive roles. Even among Nacht Libelle's elite, this rarely happens. But all 5 of them managed to do it simultaneously. And those 5 people were the ones who received the Whim buff. This couldn't simply be a coincidence, given how clearly everything unfolded. It was inevitable. She was very curious to know what would happen if she received a buff from Whim. She called Whim and asked if he could buff her. Whim agreed and asked what kind of buff she wanted. Camila smiled and requested all the attack buffs he had. She further inquired about how many times his maximum attack power could increase with the buff. Whim replied that, purely in terms of strength, considering the risks involved, it could increase by about 3 times. Camila heard this and said that no, he could do more than that. It's just that he tends to be too cautious. Whim panicked and screamed inwardly, "No, I can't buff the captain," without carefully considering the risks. It's too much of a burden and responsibility for me, but Camila happily asked him to increase it 10-fold. Whim was shocked and inwardly screamed, "No!" He didn't understand what this woman was talking about. Camila was slightly surprised and asked if he couldn't do it. Whim reluctantly replied that he could, but increasing the dose 10-fold would increase the risk of dangerous side effects. However, Camila didn't care about that and ordered him to go ahead. Camila reassured Whim that he didn't need to worry because, no matter what happened, no one in Nacht Libelle would blame him. But Whim was still concerned about the risks. Camila interrupted him, telling him to go ahead and buff her, and immediately declared her approval. She, Camila, accepted the blessing from Grantor Whim. Whim was horrified to think that she was a true war-crazed warrior, and inwardly screamed that he wouldn't be responsible for what happened. Then he started buffing Camila, activating his magic. While analyzing Camilla's body to adjust her buffs, Whim was astonished by her muscle and bone structure, wondering if she was truly human. He identifies the point of contact, establishes the center of gravity, creates small displacements, calculates each fulcrum, force point, and area of influence. Whim summoned Bowen and Enchant, then applied their buffs to Camila. She sensed the change instantly and smiled excitedly, recognizing the power surging through her body. Camila said she understood. Now it was time to act, great executioner. Camila stood face to face with the monster, then she lunged forward to attack. She used her multiplication skill to close the distance, while lightning enveloped her sword. Whim stood watching with the other members, and he exclaimed that it was the legendary sword that had been rumored to be the Great Executioner. One team member said he didn't recall Camilla's multiplication ability ever being able to make the sword that big, and another agreed that he had never seen it this powerful either. Camila prepared to attack the wyvern, chuckling softly as she called it Little Bird, and telling it to get ready. She admitted that she didn't even know what level of power she currently possessed. As the wyvern lunged forward using its Titan's strike attack, Camila swung her sword straight at it and took it down with a single blow. All the team members watched in stunned silence, speechless. Then Camila calmly walked back to where everyone was, and Whim anxiously asked her if she was all right, and if she felt anything unusual. That moved Camila, and she took Whim's hand and said that his buff was amazing and that her body was perfectly fine. Whim breathed a sigh of relief and said he was glad to hear that, as there was still about a 5% chance of physical aberration or discomfort occurring. Camila asked in surprise, "Is that all?" Whim further explained that in some cases it could even lead to muscle tears. Camila was even more shocked, asking if it was really a muscle tear, and that was all? Whim replied that it was very painful. Camila then asked if there were any other risks besides that, and Whim replied that the pain was enough to cause him to lose control of his body. Hearing this, Camila burst out laughing, leaving Whim confused about what was happening. Meanwhile, Camila thought to herself, Whim Strauss, what an interesting person. He possesses extensive knowledge of labyrinths, skills far beyond his age from the information he holds, and his enemy hunting abilities to the capabilities of a grantor, all of which are top-notch. She thought to herself that she didn't care about his past or why he'd been kicked out of the team before. She only knew one thing. She wanted this boy to be a part of Nacht Libelle. Camila kept laughing non-stop, which worried Whim, so he asked her if something was wrong. He began to wonder if it was a side effect of the buff he had just used, but then immediately dismissed the thought. Impossible, especially since this was Nacht Libelle. At the Nacht Libelle team headquarters, Whim and the other members were cheering and celebrating, throwing a big party. A man stood before the table and announced that during this dive they had discovered a gold vein, and thanks to Mark, a large part of the map had been completed. This was a resounding success, and he urged everyone to eat and drink to their heart's content to celebrate the achievement. At that moment, a girl approached Whim and unexpectedly grabbed his hand, startling him. That was Mage Monica, and she happily said that his performance was so amazing that she almost fainted from excitement. She added that the buff he used on Haida Marie's ice spear was truly difficult to perform without deep knowledge of magic. Whim became flustered, replying that it was true. Monica smiled and complimented him on being a diligent person, but Whim quickly declined, saying that it was actually just because he had once wanted to become a wizard and had studied magic beforehand. Then Whim began to elaborate on other aspects related to the spell. This surprised Monica, who exclaimed that it sounded incredibly complicated. Whim gave a wry smile, embarrassed by her reaction. Deep down, he wondered what to do next. How could one possibly have a natural conversation with someone they'd just met? Just then, someone called his name, attracting Whim's attention. It was Simon, the scout captain, and Bettina, a member of the team. Simon approached and apologized for interrupting him during the celebration, but said he was very interested in his scouting skills. Whim was astonished, thinking to himself that it was Simon, the famous captain of the scouting team. He quickly said that he had read all the books and articles Simon had published. Simon was surprised and said, "Really? I feel very honored to hear that." Simon was about to continue talking about how Whim had discovered the traps in the maze, but was interrupted by someone else. Someone shouted that they shouldn't be talking about work during a celebration like this. Mark appeared with Abel and declared that the only thing they should do right now was drink, while Abel stood behind him, smiling happily. Whim called out Mark's name, and Simon remarked that Mark always drank too much, which made Mark laugh. He handed Simon a bottle of wine and told him not to say such things anymore. They should just drink and have fun together. Then Mark sat down next to Whim and said that, anyway, his buff was really impressive. He said that the fact it could trigger a reflection made him wonder, was that the original goal? Whim hastily denied it, shouting that it wasn't true, that all he did was assist. The achievement was thanks to everyone's skills, specifically all 5 members of the team. Mark laughed heartily and complimented him, saying, "Keep up the humble and you might even get a promotion soon." This left Whim bewildered, not understanding what was happening. Abel also chimed in, saying that Whim's buff was truly amazing. He felt ashamed for his somewhat rude attitude towards him this morning. But Whim told Abel not to worry. He knew he looked suspicious at the time. He was just doing his job, so he couldn't be blamed. However, Whim was still uneasy, worried that he might be ruining the atmosphere. He chuckled softly out of embarrassment, but then realized everyone around him was silent and he immediately felt ashamed. Whim started to walk away, asking for permission and joking that he was going to kill himself. Abel immediately yelled at him to stop, saying it was all right. Abel smiled, placed his hand on Whim's shoulder, and revealed that Haida Marie had once told him that Whim often got lost in his own world. Mark chimed in, saying that Whim didn't need to worry at all. He then asked if Whim would be interested in joining Nacht Libelle anyway. Whim replied cautiously that if he was suitable for the position, then... In his heart, he thought that everyone here was so kind to him. He knew they might just be simple, polite compliments, but they all genuinely appreciated him. This place is really different from Dragon's Wings. Here, everyone has a much calmer and more mature demeanor. This is a nice place to stay. It would be great if he could actually stay there. Unexpectedly, Haida Marie appeared, taking a bite of meat as she walked in, and she said in a relaxed voice that everyone had done a great job. Whim looked at her, his voice trembling as he repeated her words. Mark called her little girl and told her to sit down, which she agreed to. Whim remarked that her appetite was as good as ever. At that moment, someone shouted that they had run out of meat, to which Whim could only comment that it was nothing unusual. Haida Marie said that Whim was becoming quite popular anyway, but he asked her not to say that anymore. She teased him, asking if he was worried about getting too much attention, and Whim admitted a little. Everyone else was doing great, while he was simply the supporting actor. Haida Marie asked if he was still talking about those things, then asked if he noticed the passionate look Camila gave him. She'd definitely go crazy for him. But Whim told her not to talk about those things anymore. He was about to say something about Camila when Haida Marie interrupted him, reminding him that she was probably in the office handling the paperwork related to today's dive. Whim said that was great, then thanked her and left. Meanwhile, Camila was in her office, feeling pressured and wondering if she could finish all her work before the end of the day. She thought today's dive was a huge success and Whim's performance was incredibly impressive. But what kept her thinking was the buff he used. That buff blended perfectly with her body, making it feel as if she had wings growing on her back, so gentle and natural that one could mistake it for her inherent strength, rather than something she was receiving assistance with. It made everyone feel like they were in their best form, and because of that, she achieved damage far beyond what she thought she could achieve. Camila wondered if they could use this kind of buff for training. But then she also considered the possibility that if people became too accustomed to the feeling of being buffed, they wouldn't be able to reach greater heights. Camila continued to think that she had probably reached the limits of her skills, but with his support, she might be able to surpass that threshold. Just then, there was a knock on the door and someone called her name. She recognized it was Whim and told him to come in. When Whim walked into the office, he wondered why she was still wearing her armor. Camila asked him what was wrong. Whim handed her a piece of paper and said that this was part of his report. He wants to submit it to the Adventurers Guild. He explained that he had discovered a gold vein during this dive, and since he was still an outsider, he felt it necessary to submit a separate report from his side. Camila thanked him. As Camila read the report, she was surprised by the amount of information it contained, wondering how it could be so detailed. With this much data, she thought that simply combining it with her own report would be more than enough. Camila felt relieved. Now she could finish her work for the day. And then Camila said that, thinking back, he had mentioned before that he used to do things like that at Dragon's Wings. Whim confirmed this and explained that he had been in charge of everything outside of combat, from accounting to other odd jobs, because apart from support roles, he didn't have many other skills. Camila was surprised to hear him say that he would take care of everything, and then she fell silent. She thought to herself, "So that's it, now I understand." She wondered if this was some kind of secret negotiation. He personally submitted his report, all because he knew this was his best chance to prove his worth and find his way into Nacht Libelle. Initially, Camila thought Whim was just a person with low self-esteem, but in the end, it all seemed to have been planned. And if that were true, she accepted the challenge and chuckled inwardly. Whim called her name, somewhat bewildered by the change in her eyes. Camila then asked him, "How about 500 liters of milk?" and looked at him with a determined expression. Whim, shocked, asked what she was talking about, and Camila replied that the newly discovered gold veins were under the control of the entire Nacht Libelle team, so he wouldn't get any share of the gold. However, if he decides to join their team, she will happily add another 2,000 on top of the initial 500. Whim was confused, not understanding what she was saying, but Camila asked if that wasn't enough for him. She secretly thought that his expression suggested he wasn't interested in negotiating, but in reality, he was so audacious that he was hiding his true capabilities, just waiting for the right moment to offer the highest price. Camila continued to think the boy was being unreasonable, but she couldn't let Whim be snatched away by another team. Therefore, she announced that she would increase his reward today to 700, and if he agreed to join, he would receive an initial bonus of 3,000 exclusively for him. Camila added that after that, his fixed monthly salary would be the same as that of the veteran members, 600 milk per month, and of course there would be additional bonuses depending on future performance. Whim was still confused while Camila asked how he was doing and what he was feeling. He hesitated, asking if it was a joke, while Camila countered, asking if that wasn't enough. She wanted to know how much he used to be paid at Dragon's Wings and said she would pay him double that amount. Whim held up 2 fingers in front of Camila, prompting her to ask if that was 200 stars and if her offer wasn't enough. But Whim stammered, denying it. Camila wondered what he meant, then figured that if it was 2,000 he was really serious about joining. However, Whim's face showed clear sadness, and then he revealed to Camila that the real number was 20. Camila was stunned, and Whim explained that the monthly salary he used to receive was only 20 units of milk. Camila immediately jumped to her feet, asking in astonishment, "Only 20?" Then she thought to herself that even a new employee at a grocery store earns more. And yet this was the salary of an adventurer who regularly gambles with their life. It was a joke. But when she looked at Whim's face, she realized that his expression didn't seem like he was joking at all. Whim told Camila that she didn't need to force herself to give him a reward. Of course, if she did, he would be very happy. But before he could finish his sentence, Whim turned and ran, and Camila called out loudly, telling him to stop. After Whim left, Camila was still in shock, wondering if he really only got paid 20 units of milk a month. She couldn't believe it. With his abilities, Whim should have been the cornerstone behind Dragon's Wings' success. She couldn't understand why he was being treated that way, and why someone who played such an important role in the team was being fired. Camila found everything absurd and wondered what kind of team Dragon's Wings actually was. Meanwhile, on the 35th floor of the labyrinth, the Dragon's Wings crew were fleeing in panic as they were pursued by a horde of goblins. Kronos ran, gasping for breath, thinking to himself that he had once believed that their adventurous life would be easier once Whim left. Since their near-fatal battle with the boss, their wounds had healed, and they had even added a new member to their fighting lineup. All of that should have made Dragon's Wings a perfect team. As long as they could recover from their injuries, progressing to the deepest levels shouldn't be a problem. They were a team about to be promoted to a higher rank. Everything should have gone smoothly. Kronos clutched her injured arm and shouted for Nikor to quickly treat her wound. Nikor replied that she understood, but Kronos yelled that she was too slow. His mind was filled with doubt, unable to understand why things had turned out this way, wondering if something had gone wrong. He turned to ask Malus if the barrier was ready while she chanted the opening phrase, "Two lines never intersect." Kronos realized the incantation wasn't finished yet, and was astonished at how long it was taking. Malus then used her fire shield skill to prevent the monster from attacking. Kronos immediately shouted orders for the entire team to retreat and follow him. Later, as the entire Dragon's Wings crew continued their journey, Kronos asked Nikor if the recovery was complete. She treated his wounds and apologized for saying she wasn't feeling well. Kronos also apologized, saying that he had lost his temper a little earlier. After the treatment was complete, Nikor asked how he was feeling, and he replied that he was much better and thanked her. Kronos smiled and said that if Nikor was all right, they could absolutely start over, which made her feel happy. Then he clapped his hands and declared that even though the team wasn't in their best form at the moment, they could still fight. Kronos added that the goblin horde would quickly catch up, so they needed to find an escape route and first determine their current location. He asked if there were any easily recognizable landmarks nearby. Melis called after Kronos and asked specifically what kind of place he was looking for. Kronos apologized, saying he didn't know either and asked if anyone had any ideas. Sophia called out Kronos' name, giving him hope that she had some clue. But she shook her head and said there was nothing there, instead announcing that they were currently at a dead end. Kronos panicked, realizing they were trapped in the worst possible situation. A dead end in the labyrinth, with the enemy close behind. At the Dragon's Wings cruise house, Melis asked Nikor if she could eat anything, but Nikor replied that it would be difficult. Melis said there was some water there. Shortly afterward, Nikor started coughing, causing Melis to anxiously ask if she was all right. Nikor replied that she was fine and thanked Melis. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Kronos entered the room, carrying a plate, and said that Sophia had peeled some apples for her. Kronos fed Nikor an apple and told her they should rest a little now. He added that he was truly surprised they encountered difficulties right on the 35th floor. Perhaps the group hadn't fully recovered from their previous battle with the floor boss. He admitted that it was all due to his own misjudgment, and if Nicker hated him for it, he wouldn't blame her. But Nicker gently replied that it wasn't his fault. Melis agreed and insisted that he shouldn't blame himself. Kronos was deeply moved by those words, and he hugged both Melis and Nikor tightly. He then said that the team simply wasn't in their best form, so they just needed to try harder and give it another try. Melis and Nikor both nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, Sophia was sitting alone, silently reflecting on the disastrous outcome of her recent dive. Their tactics revolved solely around basic swordsmanship and a few simple spells. Their coordination was very poor, and their understanding of the labyrinth map was incomplete. It's hard to believe they ever made it past floor 30. She recalled that during the battle, she used a flashbang and shouted to the group that this was their chance to retreat. At that moment, Kronos told her she was a true savior. Sophia thought to herself that despite their desperate situation, they were lucky to have survived. In that circumstance, it wouldn't have been surprising if the entire team had been wiped out. She knew perfectly well that they were still recovering, but she couldn't possibly recognize this as the B-rank team that had once defeated the floor boss. Not only that, but now there's another problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the stack of documents in front of her, she recalled Kronos saying that the person who had done this job before her was completely useless. So they had handed over all the menial tasks to that person. Then he asked her if she could take on the job. He also added that if it becomes too much, they can share the workload. But for now, he's relying on her. Sophia pondered the remark. He had called the previous person useless. She continued sifting through the pile of papers. Reports, delivery schedules, team home repair plans, invoices, taxes, and more. In addition, there are documents detailing the layout of each level in the labyrinth, along with the detailed characteristics of the monsters that appear there. The level of detail in the documents is so extensive that it's almost a complete, in-depth essay. Sophia realized that the workload was truly overwhelming, and she began to wonder if her predecessor had done all of this alone. He called that person useless, but on the contrary, Sophia began to wonder, what exactly had the leader of this team, Kronos, actually accomplished? In a flashback, Kronos is sparring with Whim. When he lands a blow that causes Whim to scream in pain, Kronos said that he couldn't even handle the role of sparring partner, then turned to Nikor and told her to treat him. Nikor replied that she understood and had begun to heal Whim, but she coldly made it clear that she wasn't doing this for him. Then she reproached him, asking if he couldn't be a little more useful for Kronos' benefit. Whim sadly apologized to Nikor, while Kronos yelled that if he was healed, he should get up immediately. Whim replied and struggled to his feet. Kronos immediately yelled at him, telling him to remember one thing. He was completely replaceable by anyone else. No place in the world was generous enough to hire someone like him. So he should start being useful for once, or he'll get fired. Whim was shocked to hear that and repeated in a panic that he would be fired. Kronos angrily retorted, "Isn't that obvious?" then yelled that he had been kicked out and told him to get out of there immediately. At that moment, Whim suddenly woke up from his dream, his whole body trembling with fear. On the roof of a nearby building, Hidamari quietly watched him and said that Whim was having nightmares related to Dragon's Wings again. She called him poor little Whim in a voice full of pity. She said that Whim is currently staying at Nacht Libelle's guest house as a temporary member, and ever since he moved here, keeping an eye on him has become much easier. Previously, due to the vast distance between their residences, surveillance was severely limited, and there were even times when she had to sneak into the Dragon's Wing space. But now, such dangerous actions are no longer necessary. The various communication seals, eavesdropping stones, and even the magic she created herself to monitor Whim All were legitimate games as long as the purpose was to ensure his safety. Hidamari giggled as she wrote in her diary. As she wrote, she recounted, Whim's Observation Diary, Volume 105, Morning. Whim starts his day by going for a run to relax his body. At the Nacht Libelle canteen, breakfast consisted of boiled and grilled sausages, moderately salty bacon, and steamed potatoes with a soft, yellow interior. Whim liked such simple meals. In the afternoon, he spent time researching magic and the ecosystem of monsters. Back in Dragon's Wings, he was always busy with all sorts of chores, but now at Nacht Libelle, he has free time to do what he truly wants. In Whim's room, Hidamari stood silently before him as he slept, thinking to herself how adorable he looked in his deep slumber. She noted in her diary that his weight was 129.26 grams, 0.21 grams heavier than yesterday. Then she continued thinking about their conversations. In one of them, she had said, "Oh, what a coincidence, I didn't expect to see you here," and Whim had replied, "Good morning." Then she walked down the hallway, thinking to herself that she still couldn't believe Whim lived so close to her. She wondered how many years had passed since they had last been this close. The next morning, while I was in my room, a bell rang continuously. Hidamari's listening stone signals that Whim is doing something that is not part of his usual schedule. She immediately opened the map to check. Hidamari wondered what Whim was doing in the courtyard. Who had dragged him out there? Was it Abel? She ordered the eavesdropping stone to activate, and when the stone began to vibrate, she heard a voice say, "Sorry for calling you so early in the morning." Hidamari was immediately shocked to realize it was a woman's voice. In the courtyard, Whim was with Camila, and she announced that they should begin. Whim agreed. Observing from the rooftop, Hidamari breathed a sigh of relief and muttered that it was just Camila after all, and she had worried too much. Meanwhile, Whim summoned Enchant and began buffing Camila. Hidamari continued to observe and commented that Whim and Camila currently seem to be using Whim's buff during a training session. She explained that the first step is, once the body has been given a weak buff, move as fast as possible so that the body gradually adapts to the new speed. Step 2, when the buff disappears, try to recreate that movement using your own strength. Hidamari continued to observe and realized that this was Camilla's plan to gradually overcome her own limitations. As Camila swung her sword, a strong gust of wind erupted from her movement. After a moment, Whim stood motionless, stunned. Meanwhile, Hidamari thought to herself, "What a monster!" Camila had adapted to the speed of the weak buff in just an hour. Camila excitedly said, "That's great, very good," and smiled with delight. She noted that her hand was still slightly misaligned and wondered how she could fix that. Whim thought for a moment, and then told her that if he adjusted the friction in her joints, she might achieve more optimal movement. He added that it was more like a performance reduction than a buff, but Camila asked if he could do it and immediately agreed. Then Camila tried again, and Whim asked her how she felt. Camila called him Little Whim and hugged him tightly between her breasts, causing Hidamari to scream in shock. Camila exclaimed with delight, "That's wonderful, absolutely wonderful." While Hidamari continued to watch, she angrily shouted, "Why would Camila do that to my Whim?" Hidamari reassured herself, "No, wait, I need to stay calm." Camila smiled, and Hidamari told herself it was just Camila. She was only hugging Whim out of excitement. Yes, simply that, there was nothing between them. Whim grinned brightly while Camila continued to hug him, and Hidamari looked back and began to wonder if there really was nothing between them. A little later, Camila said that from now on they should also invite Abel to join the morning training sessions, and informed Whim that he would, of course, be compensated for this. Whim asked if that was really okay. Hidamari continued taking notes. And then, as evening came, Mark invited Whim out for drinks. Meanwhile, Hidamari, leaning against a wall, thought that what seemed like a natural invitation was actually just a ploy by Camila to keep Whim around until he officially joined the team. She would continue to arrange for the team members to build relationships with him, making it increasingly difficult for him to leave. In the evening, Hidamari sat in her room and told herself that Whim would be out drinking with the others. She thought she wouldn't be following Whim around all day and night. She wasn't a stalker. Even she knew she had to respect Whim's personal privacy. Meanwhile, a group of male adventurers were gathered at a bar in the bustling city at night. One man, the deputy captain of Nacht Libelle, raised his glass and declared this the official welcome party for Whim to join the crew, then shouted loudly while raising his bottle high. The adventurers continued to celebrate. Meanwhile, Hidamari was on the roof of a nearby building, looking down at them. She was furious at what she saw and yelled that she knew it all along. It was full of cowgirls. They must have been to that kind of place. When Hidamari saw Whim glancing at the girls in the bar, she angrily yelled at him to stop looking, then cursed the damn perverts, accusing him of being a terrible person. But the restaurant was so crowded that she couldn't hear everything that was being said clearly. Inside the cafe, Hans chatted with Whim and mentioned that he'd heard he came from the same hometown as Hidamari, and asked if that was true. Whim nodded in confirmation, saying that they were both from Rierefeld. Hans remarked that it was quite far and asked why he had come here alone. Whim replied that it was probably just a feeling of longing, some kind of desire. Hans agreed, saying that he had also read heroic stories when he was a child, so he finally got to visit this land. Mark interjected and revealed that he heard from Monica that Whim had initially wanted to become a wizard. Whim confirmed that this was true. Mark added that if it were him, he would also prefer the wizards and fairy tales to the heroes with their epic stories. Whim agreed, saying he understood the feeling. He also mentioned that he particularly liked a story where the main character transforms into a princess later on, then awkwardly asked if he could remember its name. Hans asked if it was Cinderella, and Whim replied that it was. He suddenly realized he was engaged in a conversation, a genuine, natural, and relaxed conversation. Whim and the others continued their lively conversation while Hidamari watched them laughing and chatting from a distance. She smiled slightly and silently wished Whim good luck. At the same time, she whispered to him not to drink too much, lest he oversleep the next morning. After a while, Whim left the bar and walked alone. Mark saw him and called out, saying, "This way, the singles club goes." Another man asked Mark if he already had a family, but Mark just smiled and said it was fine. The other man continued, saying that he didn't think it was a good idea to invite Whim anyway. Mark wondered why. The other man explained that he knew that little girl, referring to Hidamari. Mark was slightly confused and turned to ask Whim if he had a girlfriend. Whim, astonished, asked if he was referring to Hidamari, then quickly denied it, asserting that they were just friends. Mark nodded, saying he understood. But the other man yelled no, then pointed out that the way she was behaving towards Whim was definitely not that of a friend. Whim explained that Hidamari was kind to him because she felt a sense of responsibility towards him, or at least that's what he thought. Both the other man and Mark were surprised, and they questioned him about what he meant by responsibility. Suddenly, Hidamari appeared and happily remarked on what a coincidence. The man unexpectedly asked if she wasn't the little girl, while Mark asked her why she was there. Hidamari replied that she guessed it was just a girls' night out. Then she turned and asked where the other two were taking Whim, which embarrassed both Mark and the other man. Whim called out Hidamari's name and she smiled, saying it was perfect timing, and asked him to take her home. Whim agreed, and Hidamari thought to himself that at least with Whim joining Nacht Libelle, things were progressing in the right direction. As they walked together, Whim asked her to listen to him for a moment. He said that a lot had happened that day. Hidamari smiled and said that she knew. Whim shared that everyone at Nacht Libelle was very kind and open to him. They truly accepted him. This was completely different from the feeling he had at Dragon's Wings. This is the first time he's felt he can truly fit in with the people around him. That's the feeling he's having right now. Whim suddenly became worried and said, "What if you're misunderstanding everyone's kindness?" But Hidamari insisted that he wasn't misunderstanding anything at all. Whim wondered how she could be so sure, saying that she hadn't witnessed everything. But Hidamari insisted that she had said it countless times already. When it came to Whim, she knew everything. She believed this was one of the most positive things that had ever happened to him. A few days later, Dominic, a member of the Adventurers Guild's investigation team, came to see Camila. Camila asked him what he was doing there. Dominic replied that his team had been conducting a secret investigation and wanted her cooperation. Camila was confused when she heard that and asked him what he was talking about. Dominic explained that the main target of the investigation was former Dragon's Wings member Whim Strauss. Camila laughed at Dominic's words, finding them utterly ridiculous. Dominic responded that it was understandable that she found it hard to believe. Camila added that what he was implying was indeed very difficult for anyone to accept. She added that the possibility of Whim, that kid, defeating the boss of floor 97 on his own was completely impossible. Dominic replied that while they both found it hard to believe, the evidence was clear. The boss's body only bore wounds inflicted by machetes. It was still possible that the group's leader, Kronos, had used Sir Whim's own machete to inflict those wounds on the monster. If they could prove it, then it would all be over. But because Sir Whim submitted a complete report with no loopholes, they couldn't open a public inquiry into the matter. Camila told Dominic that what he was referring to was the secrets within the labyrinth. And as a member of the investigation team, he had a responsibility to uncover them. Dominic replied that they had temporarily postponed Dragon's Wing's promotion to the A tier. But that still couldn't prevent the three men who hadn't inflicted any injury on the boss from being hailed as heroes of Full Brown City. However, he himself had never heard of a single person being able to defeat the floor boss. In fact, he was the only one who had put forward this theory. Dominic added that after reading all the reports submitted by Sir Whim, he could confirm that they were flawless. However, there was still one thing that bothered him. Camila asked what it was, and Dominic replied that in all those reports there wasn't a single line mentioning Whim's individual achievements. It was as if he deliberately kept himself out of the spotlight. Camila commented that it sounded very much like his personality, and Dominic confirmed that it was exactly right. Camila later admitted that although it was hard to believe since Dominic had said so much, she thought she would cooperate, especially since her team also wants to better understand Whim's combat abilities. They will need to test his fighting skills. Later, Whim was traveling with some members of Nacht Libelle and opened a public communication channel. On that channel, he announced that this was Whim, apologizing for bringing this up at this particular moment, but there was a potential trap to the left, about 50 units away. Camila replied that she understood and informed them that they would change their itinerary. Whim thought to himself that he hoped the information had been clearly conveyed, then began to recount that several months had passed since he joined Nacht Libelle. His role in the team was fairly basic. He was positioned in the center, and depending on the situation, he would either provide buffs or conduct scouting. What surprised him was that lately the team had stopped hiding their teleportation abilities from him. This meant that Nacht Libelle had begun to trust him, and they were recognizing his true potential. Whim was truly grateful that they gave him the opportunity to properly utilize his skills. On the news channel, Camila called out Whim's name, and he asked what was wrong. Camila asked if he could show her his fighting skills. This left Whim a little confused, saying that he had already been in quite a few battles. But Camila made it clear that she wanted to see him fight alone. She asked if a grantor could buff himself to fight. Whim replied that he was still very weak. Camila said that next time they plan on a large-scale labyrinth expedition, she wants to assess Whim's combat skills in case of an emergency. She added that if she could confirm that Whim was capable of fighting alone, the whole team would be less worried. She asked if he agreed with that, and Whim replied that he understood. Just then, Simon announced that they had spotted a large golem about 140 units away, traveling alone. Hans said it was a golem, while Camila turned to Whim and said that fighting this kind of monster alone wouldn't be easy. So, after he fought for a while, she would have a place to hide. Haida Marie and the others would immediately provide support. She asked for his opinion, and Whim replied that he would do his best. Camila praised him, saying it was a good answer. Then, Whim stood before the golem and realized just how huge it was, which filled him with fear. Haida Marie encouraged him from behind, telling him to keep going, that he could do it. But Whim said that a weakling like him could die from this. Haida Marie immediately replied that no, he wouldn't die. Whim drew his machete and prepared to confront the golem. Meanwhile, Hans told Camila that he knew Whim was a special person, but letting a grantor face a golem was truly cruel. Hans added that this type of opponent should be handled by teams ranked B or higher. However, Camila responded that she was fully aware of that. She said that Whim's grant ability is truly exceptional. His buffs are so detailed that they can be applied individually to every muscle and joint in the human body. Although these are all weak buffs, when combined, they create a power level far exceeding that of typical grantors. Hans asked if she believed Whim could defeat the golem, and Camila replied that it was possible. Hans thought to himself that Camila seemed to genuinely care about Whim. Meanwhile, Whim began to recount that those who became adventurers all underwent a special ritual to receive their profession, and when that happens, their bodies will change dramatically. First, their physical strength will increase tenfold compared to the average person. However, grantors are an exception, as their physical strength is only slightly greater than that of an average person. Their techniques are also very difficult to learn and master. And even when they buff themselves, they rarely reach the same level of power as other professions. That's why grantors are so rare. Their only advantage is that they can start fighting almost immediately after receiving the job, as the power change is minimal and easily adaptable. The golem lunged to attack Whim, but he immediately used his instant enhancement ×2. Zawamar's skill to dodge the attack. He went on to explain that the biggest advantage of buffing himself was that he didn't need approval from others to pave the way for the grantor's orders. Unlike simply buffing others, he can fine-tune buffs in real time. Buffs that could previously only be applied once to each body part can now be used twice. However, since his mana wasn't enough to sustain the buff for long, he was forced to end this battle quickly and decisively. Whim continued fighting the golem, thinking that with his current abilities, even he could fight it. However, because the buffs were too powerful for his weak body, the recoil would be very painful. But suddenly Whim realized there was no reaction at all. This astonished him greatly. He wondered why this was the case. Had his skills improved? Perhaps he could now fight longer than before, but he immediately reminded himself not to be overconfident, to stay calm. He wondered if he should continue and decided he should. He used instant boost ×3, droll, and charged at the golem. When Whim discovered the golem's core, he focused his gaze on it with unwavering determination. Then he delivered a precise blow that struck the core, causing the golem to collapse. From a distance, the members of Nacht Libelle were watching the entire match. Mark turned to ask Hans if he saw what had just happened. Hans replied that he had seen it, but only caught a glimpse of it in a split second. One female member remarked that the game was over, while a male member exclaimed in astonishment that he had only turned away for a moment. Hans gave a wry smile and remarked that, if only considering speed, Whim was indeed one of the fastest in all of Full Brown. On the way back to Nacht Libelle, Whim bowed his head in apology, saying that his judgment in the recent battle had been a little slow and asking if he had taken too long. But the members of the team immediately shouted in denial. One person asked if he was being sarcastic, while another excitedly exclaimed that the performance was amazing and unbelievable. Meanwhile, Camila called Hidamari over and asked who Whim really was. Hidamari calmly replied that he was just Whim, a grantor. She also emphasized that another important thing to remember was that they came from the same country. Camila responded that she knew, but that wasn't what she wanted to say. Hidamari smiled proudly and said that he was very strong. Whim ran to Hidamari, excitedly telling her that she had to hear his story. He was in a very good mood today, so he decided to be a little more daring than usual. He smiled broadly, adding that his body felt numb with excitement at that moment. Camila looked at him and thought to herself, he looked like an adventurer who had just slain his first monster. She wondered if this was really the same person who had just fought on the front lines in the labyrinth. Moreover, if he really was the one who defeated a boss, his current behavior becomes even more contradictory. Someone like him should have achieved something remarkable. However, his self-esteem is at rock bottom, and his fighting abilities have never been officially recognized before. Judging by his current behavior, Camila suspected that he wasn't intentionally hiding his abilities. She couldn't understand. Why was everything about him so contradictory and unpredictable? Hidamari turned to Whim and said, "Okay, calm down now, you're getting too excited." Whim asked, bewildered, if he had said something strange. Hidamari replied that he was practically bursting with excitement. Whim looked around and then shouted in embarrassment that it was so embarrassing. But Hidamari encouraged him, saying that he had done very well to be able to defeat a golem entirely by himself. Whim replied that he was happy this would ease everyone's worries about him. But he also admitted that he could only take such a risk knowing that everyone was always there for him. Whim rubbed his shoulder and complained that his body ached after taking such a risk. But upon closer inspection, he was surprised to find that he felt no pain at all. He thought to himself that even though he had used a level 3 buff and should have exhausted all his mana, leaving his body completely worn out, yet he still had some energy left. Whim wondered if it was because he himself had become stronger. Just then, Mark approached and urged the SHIELD team to toss him up in the air to celebrate. The SHIELD team immediately responded, shouting "Hip hip hooray," as they lifted him into the air. Hidamari smiled gently and said that the world was finally beginning to realize how wonderful Whim was. A few days later at Nacht Libelle, Monica was standing by the window, gazing intently outside. Hans asked her what she was looking at. Monica pointed outside and told him to look. She was watching Camila, Whim, and Abel practice, and remarked that they practiced every morning truly diligently. Hans turned to her and said that if she admired them so much, why didn't she join them? Monica replied that she thought her participation would only cause them trouble. Hans nodded in agreement and sarcastically remarked that she never knew when to be quiet, which angered Monica. Outside, Camila told Abel and Whim that they should stop there for today's practice. But Abel insisted that he still had enough energy and could continue. Camila reminded him that tomorrow was the large-scale expedition down to floor 98. Normally, he should be resting today. Abel admitted that he knew that, but still wanted to push himself a little harder. Just then, Whim interrupted them and asked if they could give him some feedback on the buff he was fine-tuning. He said that this would probably be the last time he would edit it. Camila and Abel immediately exclaimed excitedly in unison that they thought it was wonderful. Abel happily shared that he was delighted to train with Whim every morning. Camila said that given her current physique, he couldn't imagine how much her body had improved since they started, and she was truly shocked by how much they could learn each day. Whim shouted that no, he hadn't done anything. In fact, he was the one who had learned a lot from both of them. Camila said she was really grateful to Whim. Even though he was only a temporary member, he was always willing to go the extra mile to support everyone. She couldn't help but be excited at the thought of soon having the opportunity to seriously test herself. She became increasingly excited, saying she couldn't even imagine what would happen if she gave it her all right now. Whim thought to himself that these two were really good at complimenting him, always lifting his spirits. Camila then advised Whim and Abel that, in preparation for tomorrow, they should go to bed early. They both agreed. But unexpectedly, Camila changed her mind and said that, actually... Then she asked how the three of them would go out to eat something together. This surprised Whim. Abel excitedly said it was a great idea while Whim was speechless. Camila turned to Whim, apologized, and asked if he had made any plans. Whim confirmed and revealed that he intends to attend the scout team's group study session. Camila asked if that was the case, and she commented that it was an important event, very helpful for tomorrow's trip, so he shouldn't let them hold him back. Whim apologized for it, but Camila reassured him that he didn't need to worry about them at all. Then she laughed and said it looked like they had just been rejected. Abel turned to Camila and asked if they could continue with their morning training session. And Camila agreed, but only for a short time. Abel thanked her profusely with delight. Later, Camila was walking towards her office, telling herself that perhaps she had pushed herself a little too hard today. She thought she should probably take a slightly stronger recovery medication. As Camila walked down the hallway, she overheard the voices of several members of Nacht Libelle talking in a nearby room. Inside, Bettina explained that this was why Whim's detection abilities were so accurate, though not as wide as Simon's. Whim explained that it was because he infused the spell with a little magic. Bettina went on to comment that the trap Whim had discovered the day before was truly impressive. Camila, eavesdropping from outside, thought to herself that Whim had had a huge influence on the team since joining. But she wasn't surprised. Anyone who interacted with him would have felt the same way. She wondered how much training Whim had put in to reach his current level of skill. He ignited a fire in people's hearts, inspiring them to constantly strive for self-improvement. But when Camila heard someone say, "That kid Whim gives me the creeps," she was immediately startled. Another man commented that the members who had previously explored with him all praised him and questioned whether there was something fishy behind it. Mark heard and walked over to the man who had spoken. The man immediately apologized, saying he had only been gossiping unintentionally. And Mark replied that he understood that feeling. It was indeed difficult to fully comprehend. Mark added that Whim was a grantor, and assessing how much effort he had put in was not easy, even with Hidamari's recommendation. Accepting someone like that into Nacht Libelle is no easy task, especially considering the effort others have put in to join the team. Camila stood in the hallway, listening quietly. She thought it wasn't surprising that Whim and some of the other members, who had never explored together before, could create such a conflicting effect. In any case, Nacht Libelle is a team where students from various magic academies, along with nobles from prestigious families, all fiercely compete to be selected after a rigorous competition. Camila continued to think that generally someone who had been kicked out of a team wouldn't easily be able to join another one without undergoing a rigorous evaluation. But that will probably change after tomorrow's expedition. Once everyone witnesses Whim's true skills firsthand, things will be different. At that moment, someone contacted Camila via the communication channel, informing her that a representative from the Adventurers Guild had come to see her. Camila replied that she understood and asked her to bring the person into the office afterward. In Camilla's office, Dominic was reading a report and mentioned that Whim had single-handedly defeated a mud golem. He asked her how she felt. Camila replied that it was a very impressive achievement. Dominic then asked, in her opinion, is it possible for Whim to defeat the floor boss on his own? Camila thought carefully about it, but ultimately replied that no, she didn't think so. However, she asserted that Whim's speed was exceptional. Even within the entire Full Brown, it would be difficult to find a grantor quite like him. However, if we consider only combat ability, Camila believes that Whim is perfectly capable of reaching the same level as the core members of Nacht Libelle. Dominic asked in surprise if that was really true, but Camila interrupted him, saying that if Whim was indeed hiding something, the situation could change completely. Dominic then asked about the possibility that Whim was hiding something, and Camila simply replied that it was precisely because Whim was so special that she couldn't rule out that possibility. Dominic mentioned that a large-scale expedition to the 98th floor would begin tomorrow. If Camila discovers that Whim is hiding anything, he hopes she will inform the society. Camila agreed, but she added one condition: only if they all returned alive. Meanwhile, Hidamari was at the bar, enjoying a meal and chatting with Greta. She revealed that Whim had recently finally stopped having nightmares, and his sleeping face looked incredibly cute. Hidamari added that he even talked in his sleep. Greta heard this and asked her if it was true, but her face showed a hint of sadness. Hidamari noticed and asked Greta what was going on, calling her the cow as usual, and remarked that Greta didn't seem as happy as usual today. A man sitting next to Hidamari spoke up, telling her she didn't need to force herself like that, and addressed her as Sage-sama. He explained that last week one of the adventurer groups who regularly frequented the tavern had ventured into the 98th floor of the labyrinth, and hadn't returned since. Hidamari was saddened to hear this news and thought to himself that, driven by a desire for conquest and achievement, smaller groups often proactively ventured deeper into the labyrinth before larger teams began large-scale investigations. However, it remains unexplored territory. Of course, most who venture in will disappear forever, and if their bodies are ever found, that's still a better outcome than vanishing without a trace. Hidamari said that the life of an adventurer is always a dance with death. Even those who frequently face danger understand this, but they are still willing to step into it because they have prepared themselves mentally beforehand. There is no other choice but to accept this harsh reality. Greta slowly agreed and said that she understood. But Hidamari suddenly told Greta loudly that enough was enough, that she shouldn't be so downcast. She decided to buy Greta a drink and urged her to have one. Greta was stunned by the unexpectedness of it all, saying that this was very rare, and asked if it was really all right. Hidamari confidently declared that it was perfectly fine, and that she should have a drink tonight, the person who would treat her being none other than the next candidate to run Nacht Libelle and the 74th Sage-sama. Greta immediately raised a huge glass of wine and shouted cheers. But Hidamari shrieked in alarm, telling her to stop, calling Greta a demon cow, and she yelled that the glass was too big. Greta calmly replied that a glass is a glass after all. Hidamari tried to compromise, saying that if the price remained the same, it would be fine, but Greta revealed that the price was a milk. Hidamari immediately yelled in anger. Wasn't that 5 times more expensive? She called Greta a devilish cow again, but Greta just laughed and told her not to worry about such trivial matters. One man in the cafe burst out laughing, while another commented that it had been a long time since he'd seen Greta laugh like that. Greta turned and called Hidamari S-chan, which only angered Hidamari further, causing her to yell that her name was Hidamari, and there was no S in it. Then Greta asked if Hidamari planned to join the expedition to level 98 the next day. Hidamari replied that he did. Greta burst into tears, begging Hidamari to return safely. She said that after he returned, they should visit the cafe together with Whim one more time. Hidamari was taken aback by those words. Then she softly replied that it was only natural. She thought to herself that the person they had just laughed and joked with today might not exist in this world tomorrow. That was the daily reality of the world they lived in. Meanwhile, on the 98th floor of the labyrinth, a man yelled in panic. "What is this?" He said they had gone too deep and needed to retreat immediately. As the group of adventurers fled, a monster was in close pursuit. The desperate man apologized to Ilya and begged his daughter to forgive him. He shouted, challenging the monster to come closer. They would fight and fall like true adventurers. "Come and try," he said as the monster appeared from behind him, startling him. Finally, the day had arrived when Nacht Libelle would explore the 98th level of the labyrinth. The crowd outside cheered Camila enthusiastically, while others hurriedly called out to Hans, urging him to look in that direction. Whim looked around and thought to himself, as expected from a large-scale labyrinth investigation organized by Nacht Libelle, the atmosphere was bustling, much like a festival. He wondered if everyone else was watching too. But then, he suddenly realized that in his mind, he was still referring to the members of Dragon's Wing as everyone. He continued to think that, looking back, he hadn't heard any news from Dragon's Wing lately. He wondered if their wounds hadn't healed yet. But then he shook his head. It wasn't right. He was in Nacht Libelle now, even if only temporarily. Then you shouldn't keep dwelling on unnecessary thoughts. In the crowd, a man spoke up, saying that Nacht Libelle would be deploying 122 people for this labyrinth expedition. Another person asked what miraculous results they would achieve, and he confessed that he himself was very much looking forward to it. Another man suddenly chimed in, asking if everyone had heard anything about the sensational, newly famous interim member of Nacht Libelle, a Granter mage who had been expelled from the Dragon's Wing team. The whole group was stunned. Another person added that he had heard that the person was truly very skilled in the adventurer world, and had now become a topic of discussion everywhere. It is said that the frontline teams shouldered the greatest responsibility. They were the first to throw themselves into danger. The labyrinths are always illogical and full of deadly traps, especially for newcomers. Furthermore, the chances of encountering floor bosses or floor masters are very high. But if you overcome all those dangers, the glory of conquering the labyrinth will be a well-deserved reward awaiting you. Camila shouted, demanding everyone's attention. She announced that from now on they would begin investigating floor 98, a place no one had ever set foot in. This was a mission unlike any they had ever undertaken. It was a real and genuine gamble with their lives. She told everyone to leave their fears behind and use their willpower to prepare themselves for battle. They had to be prepared to give up their lives. But it was with those lives that they would protect their honor, their treasure, and their comrades. Camila shouted that Nacht Libelle would return without a single feather lost, without any sorrow on their journey back. They would hold their heads high, raising the flag of victory, returning triumphantly with pride. Finally, she shouted, "Nacht Libelle of full brown!" And all the members of Nacht Libelle cheered in unison in excitement. Whim also shouted along with everyone, but Haida Marie remarked that he was clearly not good at these kinds of things. Whim immediately reacted, saying that she shouldn't have said that even though she noticed. But then his eyes lowered sadly. Whim whispered that the first level of the labyrinth lay directly beneath the Adventurers Guild. From there, the team proceeded via the shortest and safest passage that Nacht Libelle had discovered on the 98th floor. Standing on this floor, Whim looked up and realized he couldn't even see the ceiling. He continued to think about his role, and on the front lines, his task was to bolster the units. If he had enough strength, he would assist in scouting, predicting traps and routes. Whim understood that his responsibility was immense, because if he made a mistake, the progress of the entire team could be seriously affected. Abel turned to ask if he was nervous, but Whim denied it, saying he had prepared everything he could. However, unexpectedly, Whim knelt down and clutched his stomach, saying that his stomach was upset. Abel looked at him and calmly remarked that he was indeed vomiting. Whim tried to apologize and told Abel that everything would be all right, that he was okay. Whim told himself he needed to calm down. He repeated once more that he should divide the situation into 2 phases. Whim then began explaining the movement and combat phases. Abel assured him that everything would be fine. He hadn't made a single mistake during training. Abel said that he trusted Whim, and in return, he hoped Whim could also rely on them. Abel smiled and went on to say that he would protect Whim, even if it meant facing the floor boss. He would endure a little hardship and show Whim what he could do. This shocked Whim. He thought about how he and Abel practiced together every morning, sometimes even just chatting casually. So he wondered if this could be called friendship, but he still wasn't entirely sure. Maybe he'd invite him out for a meal or something. Whim called Abel, but when Abel answered, Whim panicked and wondered what he should say next time. They should go eat. But at that moment, Whim was startled to hear someone say welcome to him. Abel asked him what was wrong, and Whim replied that it was just a bug. He thought he heard that every time he went into the labyrinth. Over the public address system, a voice boomed, directing the frontline team to form a bident formation. Whim quickly confirmed the order and agreed. Abel then shouted that they would begin advancing. As the Nacht Libelle team continued deeper into the labyrinth, they passed several monsters undetected. While moving, Whim heard the familiar announcement. Enemy detected, a Class B Hydra. Whim immediately paid attention and said he would check as well. He thought of the Hydra, a type of monster that usually lives near water sources. Looking around, he noticed that the walls on this floor had a damp texture, indicating a large amount of groundwater, most likely due to flowing water veins in the area. Not only were there many common fish species, but there were also bird-like creatures, and a few new species that appeared to be semi-aquatic. Over the communication channel, Whim announced that he would be in charge of searching the right side and the underground area, and requested Bettina to continue in charge of the left and front areas. Bettina confirmed that she understood. Whim added that the road ahead was gradually sloping downwards, so caution was needed when drawing the map. Bettina agreed and said that was true and that it was clearly shown on the map as well. Meanwhile, Whim continued to observe and analyze. Abel stood beside him, silently thinking about how many hypotheses Whim had come up with, and how much detailed verification he had done in such a short time. He was working far more than he was supposed to be doing. Abel continued to think that the maps Whim drew were highly detailed and accurate. With this quality, the resale value of the maps would increase many times over. Whim, meanwhile, was confused, wondering whether he should continue casting the spell or release it. But if he did that, before he could finish thinking, Whim suddenly started vomiting from exhaustion. Abel quickly offered him some water and reminded him to stay hydrated. Whim thanked him and apologized for getting so caught up in his thoughts. At that moment, Hans approached Whim and Abel, announcing that the leader was calling them. Abel told Hans that, according to Whim's estimate, there was a large hall ahead. Upon hearing this, Hans suggested that if that were the case, they should discuss the next steps there. As the three stood with the other members of Nacht Libelle, Hans remarked that, without a doubt, whichever path they chose, a vast hall lay ahead. He added that there was a smell of water in the air, possibly from a lake or a flowing river. Hans suggested replenishing the water supply as soon as possible, then asked Whim if he could analyze the water quality. Whim replied that he had previously seen a species of butterfly that could only survive in places with clean water, so the water quality here could be considered safe for now. Camila then declared that everyone had shared enough information. She asked if anyone had anything else to add. Whim began to tremble. Abel noticed and called out his name, asking if there was anything he hadn't told him. Camila gently urged him to just say it. Whim explained that the slope in this area was a bit unusual. Up until the beginning of the trip, the terrain had mostly been downhill, but at this point it started to slope up a bit. Camila nodded, indicating she understood. Whim went on to analyze that if the path was sloping towards the water source, that made sense. But he suspected this might be a trap not found on the other levels. Camila speculated. If it was a slope, there might be rocks rolling down. No, worse, it could very well be a trap that would drown the whole team. Whim agreed with Camilla's reasoning and said that, in the worst-case scenario, if the uphill slope continued to lengthen and the water continued to pour in, the entire area behind them could be completely flooded. Once trapped in the labyrinth, submerged, and if the floor boss were to appear and attack, the situation would be extremely dangerous. The entire team began to waver at Whim's analysis. Seeing this, he quickly apologized and said that it was all just hypothesis and asked everyone not to worry too much. Camila was furious at this point and she called out his name. Whim bowed his head and continued to apologize for making the whole group worry, but Camila immediately countered, saying that wasn't the case. How many times had something like this actually happened between them? Your tendency to blame yourself and overthink things has contributed to your growth. But now you're going too far. You shouldn't be holding yourself back like this. She further asserted that he also has the right to live the way he wants. Whim was moved by those words and sincerely thanked Camila. He then recounted that the investigation continued smoothly without encountering any battles with large monsters. Moreover, they discovered many valuable gold veins. At this point, the profit from this labyrinth expedition was assured. They were sure to reap a windfall. Everything was going too smoothly. To the point that Whim began to suspect something. Were they being lured deeper into a labyrinth? The way things were progressing was making them suspicious. Camila then announced that this labyrinth expedition was expected to last a week. However, in a short time, they had already achieved very significant results. Although the previous issue with the slope still made her feel a little uneasy, turning back was now impossible. Simon spoke up emphatically, Uswhite. They were Nacht Libelle, after all. How could they just turn back because they felt something was unusual? Mark agreed, saying that if they returned now, they would have to leave behind too many black maps. Whim silently repeated, the black map. A dark corner of full brown. It involves luring people under a magical spell into a labyrinth, forcing them to transmit location data and information for map making until they die. A cruel reality, one that shouldn't exist. Yet in Full Brown's underworld, these maps are bought and sold at exorbitant prices. Camila believes that if they were to back down midway through a large-scale investigation, the demand for black maps would immediately skyrocket. They've always been proud that it never happened. And it can't happen this time either. To prevent that, Camila told the Nacht Libelle team that they were forming a Vanguard. Whim thought to himself, now they were only a short distance from the Great Hall. Given the potential risks ahead, splitting the men into Vanguard teams was the best option to minimize danger. This mission obviously had to be undertaken by the most elite members of Nacht Libelle. He wondered who would be chosen. Camila then announced that the following 6 people would be joining the Vanguard. Camila began calling out the names: Hans, vice captain; Abel, captain of the shield squad; Monica, captain of the mage squad; Bettina, deputy head of the reconnaissance team; Haida Marie, candidate for executive member; and finally, Whim, temporary member. Whim was surprised to hear his name called and asked why he was on the team, while Haida Marie was delighted, saying that he had done it, and it was a remarkable achievement. Whim could only wonder if it was because of the team's balance, and thought the burden of this responsibility was too great. Camila said she put her trust in everyone while Whim was still worried about what she should do. He whispered that a large-scale investigation was underway on the 98th floor of the labyrinth, led by Nacht Libelle, with the goal of reaching the Grand Hall where a potential underground water source might exist. A team of 6 people, the Vanguard now, was formed, and for some reason, he was one of them. Whim used a power-up spell on the remaining 5 people, increasing their strength. Monica happily said that it felt wonderful. Her body felt so light. Whim explained that he applied the speed boost to help the team quickly reach the Grand Hall. If combat ensued, he would add other enhancements if they agreed. Monica took Whim's hand and exclaimed how wonderful it was, saying she had long wished to experience such a spell and was deeply moved. Whim, feeling awkward, could only reply that it was nothing special. At that moment, Haida Marie approached and separated Monica from Whim, angry that she was standing too close to him. She asked Monica to keep her distance. Monica was surprised and didn't understand what was happening, and she called Haida Marie Marie-chan. This made Haida Marie even angrier, and she yelled that Monica was being too intimate with Whim, and, moreover, that she shouldn't arbitrarily add the suffix chan to her name. Monica sadly said that was impossible, then asked if they weren't friends. Haida Marie became angry and shouted that no, they weren't friends. She was her enemy. She was Cow B, which left Monica completely bewildered. Hans then stepped between Haida Marie and Monica, thanking them for their harmony, and skillfully brought the argument to a halt. He went on to say that even though this was their first time forming a team, he still had great confidence in their abilities. Hans turned to ask Bettina if the route had been decided yet, and Bettina confirmed that it had. She explained that they would choose the shortest route and try to avoid combat as much as possible. Hans then told Whim that if he still had the strength, he wanted him to help with the reconnaissance, and Whim agreed, saying he would do his best. But soon after, Whim started vomiting due to the pressure. Abel immediately gave him some water to drink. Hans laughed and said it felt like he was a teacher leading his students on a field trip, and Bettina secretly thought that was exactly right. A little while later, Hans and the whole team were running through the maze, and he began to realize that perhaps it was thanks to Whim's enhancement spell, because despite running at such high speed, no one felt tired at all. In this situation, they might soon reach the Great Hall. But suddenly Bettina screamed, demanding to be turned to the right. Hans asked if it was because there was a monster, but Bettina replied, no, it was a trap. Hans thought to himself that this was exactly what the Survey Corps had learned from Whim, the ability to detect traps. In her flashback, Bettina recalled Whim giving her a stack of documents and saying they contained trap data. Bettina told Hans that when Whim showed her the reconnaissance data about the traps, she couldn't believe her eyes. This is a new hypothesis about how to classify traps. If statistical analysis is performed on each level of the traps, a general pattern may be discovered. Back in the present, Bettina shouted that monsters had been spotted ahead, and Hans declared that battle was inevitable. He ran toward the monster and attacked it with his sword. Hans said it was difficult to see and realized the monster was still alive. Meanwhile, Monica rushed forward, shouting, "Give it to me!" However, as Monica prepared to attack the monster, Whim shouted at her to hold back her attack. Monica immediately understood and used the loading spell to keep her output stable. She chanted a spell that the sorceress Monica would accept, Whim's enhancement. Meanwhile, Whim made adjustments, slowing her down, narrowing her range, and then applying a power boost to her. Monica then declared the start and unleashed her Dunning-Kruger electric shot. Lightning bolts struck the monster. After the attack landed, Monica was astonished to realize that all the shots had hit their target. Whim explained that he had adjusted the magic range accordingly, which thrilled Monica, who praised it as amazing. Hans asked Whim in surprise if he could enhance weapons, and Whim replied that he could. Hans then chanted that the swordsman Hans accepted Whim's enhancement spell, while Whim used magic to maximize the sword's strength and hardness without changing its weight. Hans approached the monster and told them to finish it off. Then he used the Najigiri technique and slashed fiercely at the monster with his sword. Hans stood frozen in shock as the monster fell to the ground, shattering into pieces. Whim and the others started cheering and celebrating while Hans remained standing, still in shock. He thought that the feeling of striking the monster just now was like cutting through air. The blade was too sharp. So this was the effect of Whim's enhancement. No wonder Camila praised him so highly. Whim complimented Hans, saying he was amazing, but at that moment Bettina spotted something unusual on the map and shouted that there was another monster above them. A second monster suddenly appeared from above, directly above Whim and Monica. Whim reacted quickly, activating the instant Dramer enhancement ×3 spell. Then he struck the monster hard with his machete. Hans exclaimed how impressive it was, while Heidemarie praised Whim for doing a great job. Abel nodded and said that it was exactly as expected. Whim humbly thanked everyone and said that things would be fine if they were just low-level monsters like that. Hans was skeptical, unsure if this was truly a low-level species as it appeared to be a new one. Upon examining the monster, he discovered a necklace caught in its teeth, and sadly remarked that it probably belonged to explorers who had come before them. Hans said they didn't have time to build a tomb, but at least they should pray for them. Everyone responded in unison that they understood. Whim believed that whether on the move or in combat, everyone could think and act independently, and the coordination between members was very smooth. This reminded him of Dragon's Wings, where things never went so smoothly. Once again, he realized he was in a great team. After that, Whim and the others continued forward and reached a large lake. Hans scooped up some water, confirming that, as Whim had predicted, this was indeed the Great Hall, and the water quality in the pool seemed stable. Hans added that this place could absolutely become a supply point for expeditions on floor 98, then turned to praise Whim for doing a good job. Abel also smiled and applauded, saying that it was indeed a great achievement. However, Whim still refused to take credit, saying that he was only an assistant. Heidemarie was annoyed. She told Whim he should learn to accept compliments, and then she asked him why he was always so insecure. Whim replied that he had no fondness for feeling insecure at all, and begged her to believe that he wasn't like that. But Heidemarie became even angrier, shouting that yes, Whim, who had been kicked out of his old team, was being invited into a high-ranking team just because he was her friend. A fool who was abusing her authority and influencing the entire organization. That's what she meant, and Whim simply replied that it was true. Whim realized that Heidemarie was right. Meanwhile, Abel called him, and Whim thanked him. Abel simply replied that he was welcome, which made Heidemarie smile gently. Whim later recounted that after confirming the Great Hall area was secure, the main army also joined them. Camila declared that with such a large amount of water in the Great Hall, they no longer needed to worry about traps. She praised Whim and the other members for doing a great job. Whim went on to recount that the Great Hall was now identified as the official transit point for Nacht Libelle, and they would be staying there for a night, using it as a temporary base. Later, Heidemarie peeked at Whim from behind a rock and told him to go to sleep. Whim agreed, but said there was still something bothering him. Looking at the map, he realized that the entire slope of the journey had decreased and then increased again until they reached this great hall. He thought to himself that this place looked like a wasteland on the surface of the earth, with a cave ceiling so high that it seemed to stretch on endlessly. What really worried Whim was that if somehow a large amount of water flooded in, the path they had traveled would be completely submerged, and they would be unable to return. Considering the whole situation, if this room is indeed a trap, they will drown if they try to escape. Eventually, the entire room will be submerged, and no matter what they do, there will be no way out. Whim couldn't find any viable way out of the situation. However, the current planned routes were all relatively well controlled, and overall there were no signs of water-related traps, so at least they still knew an escape route. He told himself he should go to sleep. Worrying about things like this wouldn't help. Besides, how could a large flood suddenly inundate the area? Thinking about it like that is pointless. But while Whim was sleeping, it started to rain. He jumped up, startled. A voice rang out, announcing for everyone to wake up immediately. It was raining right inside the labyrinth. Whim was stunned, thinking that this was completely unexpected and impossible. A member of the Nacht Libelle frantically asked why it was raining inside the labyrinth. While one person wondered if it was a trap, another screamed in panic, asking what the hell was going on. Whim was almost in a panic, wondering who could have foreseen this and what was really happening. He thought the situation was getting worse. The rain was getting heavier, blurring visibility. With this much rain, the water was pouring down in torrents. An old man exclaimed in horror, "Could it be that they can't turn back now?" and asked what they should do. Another person shouted to Camila that the southern passage was completely flooded. But Camila remained calm and told the person not to panic, to hold their position. She emphatically declared that they could no longer retreat. The labyrinth had trapped them in this worst-case scenario. They had to prepare to confront a monster guarding the floor while simultaneously desperately searching for an escape route. Camila then shouted to the entire Nacht Libelle that now was the time to prove their true worth. Everyone had to be ready to fight. The members of Nacht Libelle were all inspired and unanimously responded to her words. Whim thought to himself, how amazing. Everyone's fear has now transformed into determination. Meanwhile, Marie said that this was an act of Nacht Libelle, and now they should also get excited. Sometime later, Mark shouted that nothing unusual had been found in the East Corridor. Abel also reported nothing in the West, and another person said that the South Corridor showed no signs of anything either. Suddenly, Bettina shouted that something was approaching from the North Corridor. She couldn't see its full shape clearly, but it was most likely the monster guarding the floor. Camila immediately shouted orders to the logistics team that as soon as they received reinforcements from Whim, they must attack immediately. The logistics team took their positions simultaneously. Whim, on the other hand, uses enhancement spells with hardening and vibration effects on his teammates. A monster began to emerge from above. Hans remarked that it was too dark to see clearly, but it was certainly enormous. Camila asked Whim to increase his power, and he agreed. Whim uses magic to adjust stiffness, vibration, and air resistance, then comprehensively enhances the logistics team. The logistics team simultaneously unleashed area of effect attack skills such as Lightning Strike and Javer Spear, launching them all towards the monster. But Bettina realized the target hadn't been taken down yet. Something was wrong. It was transforming. It was a multitude of tentacles, and she screamed a warning to everyone. It was coming. Camila shouted to the shield team, and they all responded in unison while Whim empowered them with a counterattack effect. Mark excitedly shouted that they would face any number of opponents, no matter how many. Camila told Marie to shine the light on the target, and Marie shouted that she would leave it to her. Marie remarked that she had seen its body and used flash roar, causing everything to light up brightly. Everyone was shocked when they saw the monster's body, wondering if its size was too enormous. Camila asked Whim if he recognized what it was, and said it was definitely the floor-guarding monster. Whim replied that it didn't resemble any of the previous guardian monsters. If he had to compare it, it was like a small sea creature about the size of a dugong. Camila reasoned that if it were a sea creature, then fire would surely be effective. Whim agreed and said the path was still clear. Camila ordered the logistics team to use fire magic and fire separately. They all responded and began the attack. Marie uses Fireball, Hans uses Flamethrower, and Monica unleashes Blazing Hot Wind. The monster took a series of blows while Camila watched and remarked that the attacks were effective. She shouted that even cutting the tentacles would cause damage. The frontline team coordinated with the shield team to defend against the tentacle attacks while counterattacking the monster's main body. Camila further instructed that the logistics team should also split into pairs to intercept and attack independently. She informed Whim that he didn't need to maintain the enhancements for anyone outside the shield team, and you should save some of your energy to focus on defense. Taking his position, Abel shouted that they could do it. Meanwhile, Mark called Whim to encourage him. Whim replied that he understood and began maintaining the enhancement only for the shield team. Whim secretly recounted that from that moment on, the scene was magnificent. In response to the magic of the defenders, the front line moved through the gaps. Employing a hit-and-run tactic, they gradually wore down the boss's strength. Whim went on to recount that everything was meticulously calculated, like observing a game of chess. And there, even though it was raining heavily, they should have been completely in enemy territory. But the situation turned in their favor. Whim thought that being able to repel the boss to this extent on their first encounter was proof of the true strength of a top-tier, full-brown team. At that moment, Camila called out to Whim. She drew her sword and announced that she would enter the battle. She told him to enhance her to the fullest extent, without holding back anything. She smiled and said, as usual, that she put her trust in him. Whim agreed. Camila has announced she has accepted the enhancement from Grandor Whim. Meanwhile, the other members noticed her and said that the captain had gone into battle. Whim performs optimal enhancement to synchronize with Camila and transfer the spell to her. Seeing Camila charging forward, Mark instructed everyone to retreat and not get in the captain's way. Whim stood watching while Camila thought she intended to end it all with one blow, because bosses often have hidden tricks up their sleeves. Therefore, if possible, it's best to defeat them immediately before they even see those moves. Camila shouted that it was time to act. This was the moment to put all the results of their training to the test. She recalled that a few years ago she had been proud of having trained her body to the extreme and mastered magic. But then she realized that there were limits to it. Camila completed her 1,022nd training session and muttered that it was still the same as before. She gritted her teeth in frustration and anger, saying that there had been no progress. Camila added that if she couldn't improve further, then as a leader she would dedicate herself to commanding and leading others. But at that moment, as a warrior, she would have died. However, she accepted that reality. Back in the present, Camila stepped forward among the other team members, who announced that the captain had gone into battle and would be entrusting everything to her. Camila thought that with each enhancement Whim received, the enhancement spell became more and more refined, naturally integrating into her body. For someone who had once believed she had reached the limits of her potential, these enhancements gave her hope. Camila looked at the monster and continued to think that Whim probably didn't know how much she valued him. As they recall the moment their paths first intersected, she felt the exhilaration of a warrior, and that very moment made her feel reborn. Then Camila summoned Coyote Jerry, and a large bolt of lightning appeared on her sword. Whim was astonished and remarked that this lightning strike was even more powerful than the previous battle with Wyvern. Han said that luckily this level has a skylight, so the captain's abilities wouldn't be limited. Camila charged straight towards the monster, preparing to unleash her slashing attack. Haida Marie exclaimed in shock that the monster was much bigger. Camila felt her body become incredibly light, and she smiled, thinking that in this state she could slash with all her might. This feeling was truly blissful. One of the Nacht Libelle members shouted that they had to retreat further, as the captain was fighting without restraint. They had to be careful not to be caught in the crossfire. Camila used her Coyote Jinjiri skill and sliced the monster in half. Whim stood watching with the other members and exclaimed in amazement at that power. Meanwhile, the monster collapsed to the ground in pieces. Everyone stood frozen in shock before beginning to cheer and celebrate, but Whim still worried, thinking it wasn't over yet. At that moment, Simon cautiously announced that the target's biological response had not yet disappeared. Camila immediately shouted a warning to everyone not to let their guard down and to continue the attack. Haida Marie immediately used Fireball to attack the monster, while Abel used Void Cut. The attacks blew the monster apart. The members of Nacht Libelle stood there anxiously. While Simon looked at his screen and happily announced that there was no reaction from the goal, the victory was theirs. All the members were overwhelmed with happiness and began cheering in celebration. They cheered that they had defeated the level leader on their very first expedition, which was unbelievable. A historic moment had just been made. As expected, they are Nacht Libelle. They did it. When they return, they will throw a celebration. The biggest party ever. Meanwhile, Whim stood motionless, bewildered, wondering what was happening. Was it really over? If defeating the boss of the next level was that easy, then... But then he immediately dismissed that thought. It wasn't easy at all, and they simply eliminated the monster before it could become a threat. This was a natural outcome thanks to Nacht Libelle's quick and precise actions. Even so, he still felt uneasy. Just then, Abel ran up from behind and called his name. Whim turned around and smiled. But as he walked toward Abel, he slipped on the mud. Abel warned him to be careful because the water level was rising due to the heavy rain. Whim bowed his head sadly, but Abel noticed and asked what was wrong. Whim thought that along with the rain, the leader of the floor would also suddenly appear and attack. He wondered if it had the potential to make it rain, but he immediately decided not to jump to conclusions. Thinking too much wouldn't do any good at this moment. Abel helped him to his feet. Whim thanked him, then quickly switched on the communication channel to inform Camila that it was Whim. While Camila asked Whim what was wrong, Whim told her that due to the rain, the water level was rising, so the semi-aquatic monsters would be more active. He added that they can move faster in water while their speed of movement decreases. Camila noted that the crisis was not over and asked Whim if that was what he meant, to which he confirmed. Camila smiled and said that he was absolutely right and apologized for getting too excited earlier. Given the current situation on this level, the results achieved are sufficient. They should withdraw. She asked Whim if he had any plans to withdraw, and he confirmed that in the narrow passage to the northwest, there might be a place where they could avoid the floodwaters. But the distance is quite far, and with such a large group, it might take quite a while. Suddenly, Whim was surprised and wondered why he was still trembling. As Whim and the Nacht Libelle group were making their way through the heavy rain, they heard a sound coming from behind them. Abel and Whim turned around, their faces bewildered, while Abel wondered what the sound was, what kind of noise it was. At that very moment, a gigantic monster emerged from the water, causing the members of Nacht Libelle to stare in horror. Whim thought to himself that in that instant, everyone understood that this was the real boss of this floor. Many other monsters began to appear, while the other members fearfully said that the one they had just seen was just an ordinary soldier, and wondered if that was really the case. Camila watched in amazement and exclaimed that it was indeed the 98th floor. This wouldn't be easy. The boss released a plume of black smoke into the sky, leaving everyone stunned and unsure what to do. Simon reported that the rain had severely reduced visibility. He couldn't even determine how many small monsters were approaching. He added that the rain was getting heavier, making it difficult to hear any sounds. This must be the boss's ability. It must possess such power. Meanwhile, Mark announced that 2 small monsters had been confirmed in the west, and another person reported 2 more in the east. Another person from the south confirmed there were 5 children and, trembling, asked what they should do now. Suddenly, Bettina shouted that the north was also surrounded, that they were encircled from all sides, and urged everyone to quickly give orders. Everyone fell into a state of chaos. Hearing this, Whim panicked, thinking the situation was extremely critical. They were in serious trouble. Someone shouted, urging everyone to remain calm. On the general media channel, Camila ordered the entire team to assemble and take defensive positions. Abel also shouted for everyone to quickly get into defensive formation. Whim thought that no matter the situation, Camila never lost her composure, which was the quality of a leader. Then the members quickly took their defensive positions, with Whim standing behind them. Whim was worried, not knowing what to do now. The escape route was blocked, making retreat extremely difficult. If they were forced to fight even Nacht Libelle, could she possibly handle the boss of the floor, along with many smaller monsters at the same time? How far can they fight, and if they retreat, will they be pursued? Suddenly, someone called Whim's name, making him jump. Mark said that he shouldn't be looking down like that. It wasn't in his nature to have such a gloomy expression. He should look around. Seeing Abel and the others ready to fight, Whim wondered if he was the only one panicking. Then Whim shouted with determination, "Yes, I will look ahead." He told himself that he had reconsidered. There was no guarantee they could overwhelm the enemy, but that didn't mean they were at a disadvantage either. He thought they still had enough strength, and so far no one had been injured. Everyone will return safely. From now on, you need to assess the situation and make sure you do what you can. The monsters lunged at Nacht Libelle. Camila shouted for defense, and the members quickly responded. Other monsters also attacked simultaneously. Whim hastily reinforced Abel and the rest, while Abel shouted at the members to endure, and they all agreed. Hans commented that there were too many tentacles. Camila declared that after defending themselves, they would counterattack and strike the boss. A man, frightened, looked at the monsters and asked if that was too much. While Whim watched in silence, Camila shouted that they were coming. The members began fending off fierce attacks from the monster's tentacles. Whim tried to defend himself, but was still hit. He braced himself and told himself he had to persevere and endure. Camila shouted to everyone to hold on, and Whim realized that it was her voice that had lifted everyone's spirits. However, Nacht Libelle suffered serious losses. Whim admitted that the worst-case scenario had occurred, even though they had prepared themselves mentally. Their strength and training were sufficient, but in the end, things still turned out this way. This is the absurdity of the labyrinth. All expectations have become meaningless. Returning with everyone is no longer possible. The enemy was too strong. The first groups to encounter the arena boss were all wiped out. Camila called Whim and told him that he wasn't officially a member of Nacht Libelle yet, that he could easily escape on his own, and that no one would blame him for doing so. So she asked if Whim could help her with something, but Whim replied that he couldn't. Camila apologized, then calmly stated that returning with everyone was no longer feasible. They had to accept that there would be casualties. The focus of the current plan was on her and Whim. She asked him to listen carefully. Whim replied, and Camila told him to channel all his enhanced power into her, and she would defeat the monster. Whim panicked, but Camila continued that no further assistance was needed. They would split into groups of 3 and disperse when the opportunity arose. And if possible, Whim should show the others the way to safety. Whim shouted, asking her to wait a moment. But Camila interrupted him and walked toward the monster, saying as she went that she would take responsibility, that everything would be all right, because there were still many talented people in Nacht Libelle. Whim yelled at her to stop because Camila seemed to be... But Camila interrupted him again and said that if Haida Marie, Abel, and Whim joined Nacht Libelle, the group's future would surely be secure. Looking toward Whim, Camila pleaded earnestly and declared that she accepted Whim's enhancement. Whim burst into tears and cast a spell on her. Camila then made an announcement on public channels asking all members to pay attention and declaring that this would be her final message. This battle was ordered. She would confront the boss on this floor. After assisting the wounded, the groups should split into teams of 3 and, when the opportunity arose, find a way to retreat. She had entrusted Whim with the escape route. Camila then thanked everyone for everything, causing one member to yell, "No way," and ask what she intended to do, but Camila cut off communication. The member said, stunned, that the connection had been cut off. Camila looked up and thought, strangely she felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She stared intently at the floor boss, introduced herself as Camila, and acknowledged the other party as the owner of that floor. But with all due respect, she will take its life. Camila yelled for the floormaster to come out and prepare to die, then lunged at it with her sword. She charged straight at floormaster and slashed at its tentacles with her sword. Camila wondered if it would let her deliver the fatal blow, and what if it ran out of time. Drawing out a scythe, Camila asserted that it was a high-grade weapon, and launched an attack on floormaster. She ran closer to it, ordered it to burst into flames, and wondered what was happening. Her body moved effortlessly without feeling tired. She felt she could push her limits endlessly. Camila wondered if this was really her, if she was the same person who used to be so stagnant and emotionless. She screamed that this was, and continued to doubt whether it was really her. Then, Camila leaped towards Floormaster, believing she could do it, that she could fight on equal terms. She began engaging Floormaster in direct combat, continuing to think that she would sever all of its tentacles, then deliver the decisive blow to its main body. Meanwhile, Whim observed and thought to herself that it was amazing. Even though she had become unreasonably strong, she didn't waver at all. This battle was like a legendary fairy tale. This was the ultimate display of the strongest warrior of full brown, Camila. He put all his energy into it. He couldn't let the time Camila had dedicated to him go to waste. He will follow her orders, assist everyone, and then withdraw. Meanwhile, while Haida Marie was treating Mark, Whim appeared and ran to her. When she saw Whim, she called his name and told him that she trusted him. Whim remarked that the area seemed safe, and Haida Marie replied that Hans appeared to be safe. But the situation of the second reconnaissance team was not good. She started walking and asked Whim to come along, and he agreed and followed. As he walked, Whim thought this was really troublesome. His body felt heavy. Of course, it was due to exhaustion, but not only that, his legs felt incredibly heavy, as if something was weighing them down. Kronos' words from the past echoed in his mind, that he was useless, that he should obey his superiors. Whim recognized that feeling, the feeling of his time in Dragon's Wings. He wondered why he was thinking about that at this moment, and realized he didn't have time to be distracted. Haida Marie called Whim in a very angry tone. Meanwhile, Whim recalled Camilla's words that retreating in battle didn't guarantee safety, that he should just do what he could. He also remembered Camila complimenting him on how much he had improved, to which he had simply replied that he was fine. Whim thought he couldn't shake these thoughts and wondered why he hadn't felt this way before. He recalled the time Camila asked him about 500 pounds of milk, then asked him to demonstrate his fighting skills, and also when she invited him to eat with her. Then, Whim told himself he had to concentrate and just follow orders. He counted down 3, 2, 1, as always, without thinking, just following Camilla's instructions and stepping forward. When Haida Marie grabbed his shoulders and yelled at him to look at her, calling him an idiot, Whim was confused. She said she would show him what his face looked like right now. She said he was freezing up, and that smile was exactly the same as when he belittled himself in front of that piece of trash Kronos. She asked him what he was thinking and told him to stop avoiding the issue and think things through carefully. Haida Marie then asked Whim what he was thinking and said that he was doubting himself, but Whim remained silent. Meanwhile, Camila is still battling the Guardian of the Floor. Mark and the other members shouted that they could do it if they went with their captain, while Hans yelled that no one should give up. Camila continued fighting the monster, then she noticed its attacks had temporarily stopped. She thought this was the perfect opportunity, one she couldn't let slip away. A massive bolt of lightning enveloped her sword, and Camila yelled at the floor guardian to take everything she had, then unleashed her decisive blow. She used a manhunt tactic to fend off counterattacks, and told herself that it was a good thing. But then Camila was horrified to discover that one tentacle was still intact, and realized she had to dodge the next attack. However, the monster struck her. Whim and Marie were terrified when they saw that. Whim immediately used the temporary acceleration spell, tripling his motor skills. Then he saw Camila falling from a great height. He immediately rushed to catch her and shouted Abel's name. Abel was bewildered, not understanding what was happening, and just as Camila was about to fall to the ground, Whim rushed over and caught her. He frantically called out Camilla's name. The Guardian of the Layers attempted to attack them from behind, but Abel quickly counterattacked, blocking the blow with his shield. Abel shouted that he would hold it back. Whim thanked her and set Camila down on the ground. He anxiously asked if she was all right, if she could still hear him. Then he realized that her bones were broken in many places. Her body was covered in blood, and even her internal organs were damaged. Camila gradually regained consciousness and asked if anyone else had survived. Whim replied that they were all still here. They couldn't retreat. He said that no one had to sacrifice their lives yet, and hoped they could all return together. But Camila laughed when she heard that and said he was too young. She added that the young, healthy people should retreat and leave behind those who are injured like her. Whim was frightened when he heard that and said that couldn't be true. Camila said that if she had his enhancement, she could at least act as a meat shield. But Whim shouted in denial, saying it wasn't true. Camila saw the other members still fighting and told Whim that she still couldn't give up. She pleaded with Whim for help and declared that she, Camila, accepted the enhancement from the mage Whim. Whim thought that even mere suspicion was a waste of precious time. It's a waste of Camilla's life. No matter how many teammates have to be sacrificed, the majority of the group will surely perish. He continued to think that at full brown he didn't fit in with a good group of adventurers. He wasn't the kind of person they considered normal. He vaguely realized that he was someone who deserved to be left out. But Camila and everyone in full brown is someone who needs protection. No matter how many times he dies, he can't atone for his mistakes. These are wonderful people who have accepted you for who you are. They are people worthy of respect. Whim continued to think there was still one last hope, and announced on the public broadcast channel, "Everyone, this is Whim." A statement that left everyone bewildered. Whim said he was very sorry and that he would disobey the order. Abel frantically called out his name, while Whim said that this might not be the best option, but it was the best option he could offer. This is the only way you have, so it's okay. You have no other choice. Whim declared that he would halt Lord of the Levels, and informed everyone that they should seize the opportunity and retreat. Camila asked what was happening. Meanwhile, Whim used Hurt's Stalemate and told her that it was a debuff called Hurt's Stalemate. He told Camila that he would defeat the Lord of the Levels, and she remarked that there was finally something good about him. Whim thought there was no turning back and wondered why this was happening. Normally, he despised such unusual actions. He remembered Marie and Camila's words. They had told him he was free to live life his own way, and now he understood. They had indeed told him that. Then, Whim used Transition Puppet Master and prepared for battle. Camila called out Whim's name and asked what he was doing. Whim replied that defeating that guy was his mission. As Whim stepped forward, Marie asked if he was coming, and Whim replied with a simple, "Yes." She smiled and told him touchingly that she understood. She added that he had become very bold, but he was still the same, always complaining and suspicious. But Whim interrupted Marie and smiled, saying it was time to say goodbye. Then he bid her farewell. Marie told Whim not to worry, that he had enough strength to win. Whim anxiously told her not to worry too much, that he was just trying to stall for time like last time. He added that this time the opponent was much stronger than the previous leader of this floor, and he wondered if there was something strange about it because his emotions were surging. Marie observed that Whim was trembling slightly and asked if he was scared. Whim replied that perhaps so, since feeling scared is natural when you're gambling with your life. But Marie thought that the emotion Whim was feeling was probably not fear. Then Whim said he would leave now because there was no more time. Marie nodded and told him to be careful. Deep down, Marie thought that he still didn't truly understand himself. She believed she understood him even better than he understood himself. And one day, you will surely understand yourself better than anyone else in the world. When that happens, she wants you to tell her everything. She once said she knew everything about him, but in reality, there were still things she didn't know. While Whim smiled, Marie wondered why he could smile at a time like this. Meanwhile, the tentacles of the floor leader began to regenerate. One team member complained that the tentacles the captain had painstakingly cut off had grown back, while others were angry, feeling they were mocking them once again. Whim realized the water level had risen significantly and quickly moved forward. He understood that they needed to resolve this as quickly as possible because if the water rose any higher, the monster's movements would become even faster. He wondered how he could help everyone in this situation. Standing before the floor leader, Whim raised his head, clenched his fists, and asserted, of course, he would do his best. He told himself that in his role as a specialized support person, he could strengthen many things, especially parts of the human body. However, the difficulty will vary depending on the part being reinforced. The easiest parts to reinforce are bone and muscle, and most reinforcements are completed in just 1 or 2 treatments. But if you want to go beyond that limit, such as regulating blood flow to deliver oxygen or enhancing heart function, then you'll need to delve into an invisible realm. And that requires strengthening the body's central core. Therefore, very few people can perform this technique. However, there is still one area where reinforcement is completely forbidden, even beyond the heart, and that is the brain. In a flashback, Whim is reading a book and wondering if this is hopeless, given the sparse descriptions of brain reinforcement in the book. Whim read that despite many attempts, no one had truly completed it. He said that the region controlling consciousness could have its processing speed increased if possible. Combat capabilities can be significantly improved, but this comes with an extremely high level of risk. Strengthening someone else's brain is nearly impossible, even for someone with enhanced abilities but weak combat skills. Even if they could strengthen their own brain, it wouldn't offer much practical benefit. Whim wondered if anyone would be willing to risk their life just to try that. He thought back to the scene where Kronos had yelled at him, telling him not to bother, to get out of the way and let him finish things. At that time, Whim could only bow his head in apology and beg for forgiveness. Back in the present, Whim declares that if he wants to gain power, this is the only way left. He uses the transition puppet master skill, which directly affects his brain, causing a flood of memories to rush back. When Whim transformed, he exclaimed, "Yes, that's it!" Whim recounted that brain-enhancing procedures are extremely dangerous, and if not done carefully, users could lose consciousness. In fact, continuing to increase the processing speed of the brain, which is already very fast, can overload it. But what he was actually doing was very simple. He just needed to become acutely aware of his own consciousness. And then he repeated the process of asking and answering questions to himself. He adjusted his senses and finally set the multiplier, just before he felt overwhelmed. A subtle adjustment, not exceeding the limit to avoid losing consciousness, but still reaching the highest limit he could handle. The current multiplier was 1.1 times. This was his limit. The side effects may manifest as brain damage, but it's possible. Absolutely possible. He steers himself toward realizing all the hypotheses he's already theorized, in a mind that's been accelerated beyond recognition. That's the transition puppet master. Whim was ready to fight, and the monster lunged at him. Caught in the middle of a battle with the floor leader, Whim thought the situation was dire and wondered if he had just died. He recounted that the scene seemed to slow down in a strange way. He continued fighting, slicing off the tentacles with his machete and charging toward the giant monster. The leader of the floor launched an attack, but Whim dodged it. The members of Nacht Libelle witnessed it all in stunned silence. Whim continuously dodged attacks and used his instant enhancement skill with a 20 times multiplier. He was surprised and wondered why everything seemed so slow. He can feel his entire body. He knows the best way to act. You understand the perfect timing. He could feel every tiny movement of each muscle fiber, breaking it down into milliseconds. Whim continued to think that strong people train to win 10 out of 10 times. But weaklings like you must focus on seizing that 1 in 100,000 magical moment, a perfect coincidence, and pour all your energy into it. It's not just about achieving success, but about making success happen. Whim told himself that to dodge this attack, he had no choice but to jump with such force. Therefore, he strengthened the elasticity of the ligaments. He continued to fight, believing he had to constantly search for a miracle, a 1 in 100,000 moment, or he would die. Meanwhile, Camila was watching Whim and exclaimed in horror, "What just happened? He just jumped into the air." Hidamari was also astonished and remarked that it seemed as though he had neutralized the momentum of the backward slash. a movement that would normally cause damage to joints or ligaments. She wondered if it was an achievement only possible with a body that had been enhanced. Camila remarked that those movements were beyond human comprehension. Meanwhile, Hidamari yelled at Whim that he could live his life the way he wanted. Whim grinned broadly, thinking he had done it. He had overcome an extremely low probability, witnessing countless miracles happening among 1 in a million. He no longer fully understood everything, but he still knew that it wasn't enough. He would still die if he made a mistake in judgment, even if it was only a tenth of a second. In that instant, he would be struck by the tentacles and his bones would be broken. However, speed was his ally at this moment. He wondered what to do next, but was surprised to see the floor leader creating a magic circle. Whim was shocked and wondered if it was magic. Whim dodged the attack from the leader of the floor and realized that the monster was also using its own tentacles to attack. It attacked again, making Whim wonder if it would even give him a second's rest. However, Whim continued to dodge and smirk maliciously, thinking that he would avoid them all at all costs. Whim was battling Floormaster while the other members stood frozen in astonishment. One member asked how he did it and another wondered what it was. Abel recounted that it was difficult for all of them to comprehend what was happening before their eyes. He called out Whim's name, the only one currently facing one of the most powerful creatures of the lordly class. With each passing millisecond, a high-speed battle was unfolding. The leader of the airspace relentlessly launched attacks towards Whim, but he dodged them all spectacularly and the blows landed on the monster standing behind him. Whim charged straight towards the floor leader, thinking to himself that this monster could even jump, moving by using water pressure. And at that very moment, its enormous body gently floated in the air. Whim landed on the ground and crawled beneath the floor leader. And he wondered to himself what the hell he was doing. He even felt a disconnect between his own consciousness and his own reason. In the blink of an eye, he performed a series of actions, all happening at a speed far exceeding normal limits. Whim leaped out of the water, thinking that if he didn't get out before the floor leader landed, he would be crushed the moment he hit the ground. He continued to fight with a probability of 1 in tens of thousands, and thought that standing on the brink of death meant he wasn't dead yet. He watched the floor boss and thought it was strange. He had torn his own body apart from the inside, but he hadn't yet reached the internal organs. But when Whim saw a dark figure appear, he exclaimed that it was impossible. Time was running out. He had to retreat. Whim was still fighting the floor leader and thinking to himself that it was unbelievable. Everything was happening exactly as he had imagined. Everything that came to mind he was able to do instantly. As he landed, Whim felt as if his body was on fire, yet his mind was incredibly calm. He wondered if this was a feeling of exhilaration. Whim suddenly realized he had become too caught up in the excitement. The lives of all the members of Nacht Libelle now depended on him. Right now, if he didn't buy enough time, someone could die. He told himself that he couldn't stray from his mission. There was no time left to enjoy himself. He secretly recounted the exhilarating feeling of being close to death. The greater the danger, the more intense the feeling. This is exactly what he had long envisioned. He had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Whim was surprised and wondered to himself if he was still alive. Meanwhile, other monsters began climbing onto the floor leader's body, and a team member frantically asked what the creature was doing. While Hans shouted that it might be a transformation, the floor leader began to transform while Whim watched in astonishment. He wondered if it was really floating and what the principle behind it was. Magic didn't mean you could do anything. Whim secretly thought that the shapeshifters, the false rulers, always had a final trump card. The previous person did the same thing. That means this time they've been cornered. The floor leader completed his transformation, while Whim smiled coldly and declared that the second round had begun. Mark exclaimed in astonishment that it was a transformation, and no one knew what kind of attack was coming. The young people had to retreat immediately. Mark called after Abel and said that he had his place, but to leave this to the veterans. Abel shouted his refusal, saying he didn't want to do it. As the shield commander, he would block any stray attacks. Mark asked if there was anything else. Abel insisted that there was still a glimmer of hope, that there absolutely had to be. Mark smiled in agreement with Abel and told him not to think about death, to which Abel agreed, saying that he understood. Amidst the fierce battle with the floor leader, Whim felt uneasy about the monster hovering in the air. He suspected that those objects might be support devices, and if they attacked from the air with a wide range, jumping to dodge would no longer be effective. That wasn't enough. He needed more. Whim activated instant enhancement with 50 times the intensity, confirming that this way he could expand his vision beyond its limits. He memorizes everything beyond his sight, processing all the information at once. He felt the pressure building up to the point where he almost fainted. When the floor leader launched a surprise attack, Whim dodged by a hair's breadth and counterattacked with supersonic speed. While fighting, he noticed that he could now see everything. Every reflection, every shadow cast on the water's surface, even the tentacles and attacks from blind spots. Tentacle 377, Blade 490, Spearhead 55, Flying Bullets 1020, including what's beyond your sight. Upon seeing an attack coming, Whim went on to say that he could even accurately predict its trajectory. Whim dodged the attack and slashed at the monster with his machete. He chuckled and thought that, as expected, this ruler wasn't making any pointless moves. How wonderful, how interesting. In a state of apparent omnipotence, with a 360-degree view of everything, the feeling that everything was running smoothly filled him with contentment. Whim kept thinking that a single moment of misstep would bring instant death, but that very feeling sent shivers down his spine. It was as if he were negotiating with a supreme power. He wondered if he truly harbored this desire deep within himself, and now he's at his peak performance. And that's the real joy. The floor leader attacked again, but Whim quickly dodged and laughed. He said it was really dangerous, he almost got hit. Meanwhile, Marie was treating Camila, who thanked her and said that was enough. On the radio, Camila asked Hans about the progress of the evacuation. Hans replied that there were many projectiles flying towards them. He was doing his best to protect the injured and asked Camila what they would do to support Whim. Camila was confused when asked about providing support and said that the battle was happening at such a super fast pace that it was impossible to provide assistance. It would only be a hindrance. She ordered everyone to keep as far away as possible while she would focus on defense. Hans replied that he understood, and Camila used her great slash to create a shield in front of herself. Camila then thought that when Whim said he would defeat the high-ranking ruler, she used to think it was just empty talk. But that's not the case. They are actually evenly matched, and Whim has even put his opponent in a difficult position. Therefore, they should put their trust in the young man Whim, because now no one else can interfere in this battle. Meanwhile, Whim continued his battle with the floor leader, telling himself that he hadn't known he had this side to him before. How precious it was to fight without having to think about anything else. He could only defend against its attacks, but he couldn't yet attack its actual body. This will be a war of attrition if it continues like this. Whim told himself he needed to think and said that there was something suspicious about that black mist, something solid within it. A shell. That must be the monster's weak point, perhaps its core or internal organs. If you can break through that shell, you will win. But when Whim discovered a path leading to the creature, he was astonished to realize it was the shortest route to reaching the supreme ruler. He wondered how he had arrived at this conclusion, as he himself didn't understand how the calculation had worked. It must have been a series of inspirations, a series of parallel events overlapping in probability, and a suitable solution that actually came into existence. If you follow this path, you can end the match quickly, as long as you don't make any mistakes. And now that I think about it, maybe he's always been trembling like this. Whim realized that this was his intuition for victory, a path charted among millions of miraculous possibilities. Even though there was a 99.9% chance of him dying, he was now certain he could do it. It looks like a reckless, suicidal act, but if this is the feeling it gives, then it's worth it. Whim continued fighting the monster while the floor boss unleashed a barrage of attacks aimed at him. While Hans watched and wondered if Whim would disappear while suspended in midair, Whim wondered if the rain had stopped, but quickly realized that was because he had jumped above the clouds. As he began to fall from a great height, Whim exclaimed that it was amazing to be so close, and that he would use this momentum to accelerate to maximum speed. Midair, Whim noticed the sound had disappeared. The space became silent as if he were the only one left in the world. He was practically the ruler of this place, and had a strangely exhilarating feeling. Shortly afterward, Whim discovered a barrier and broke through it. He prepared to attack the floor leader. He decided to channel all his remaining strength, reinforcing his body to the maximum extent. He maintained his momentum and crashed straight into the leader's head, pierced and tore its body apart. Whim announced that it was it, the Black Mist, and as he approached, he saw an egg. From there, a bizarre-looking monster appeared. The monster advanced toward Whim and emitted some sounds directed at him. Whim recounted that he didn't understand the meaning of the sounds, but he didn't feel bothered by them either. After a while, Whim began to move away from the floor leader and coughed violently. He turned around and saw Camila and the others running towards him, which made him happy. Whim thought he had fought to protect everyone, or so he thought, before collapsing unconscious. Everyone called his name anxiously. When Whim slowly opened his eyes, he noticed the rain had stopped. He then recounted the results of the large-scale expedition to the 98th floor of the labyrinth, conducted by the group of night dragonflies. 3 gold veins discovered, 28 new monster species confirmed. And regarding the elimination of the high-ranking leader, a total of 106 people were injured, including 12 seriously injured with no casualties. On the 50th floor, a monster suddenly attacked Kronos, but Kronos quickly dodged the blow. He called out to Nikor, and Nikor replied that she was handling it. She used her explosive crushing skill to attack the monster. Sophia uses a binding spell to restrain the monster, while Kronos tells Melis to get ready. Melis immediately unleashed her fire blanket attack, engulfing the monster in flames. Then Kronos thrust his sword into the monster and sliced it to pieces. Melis excitedly complimented him, saying he was so cool, while Nikor said she knew he could definitely do it. Sophia thought to herself that it was truly an incredible performance. She recounted that with Nikor's wounds healed, Dragon's Wings decided to continue their exploration of the labyrinth. As expected, their coordination has improved significantly compared to before. She was tasked with planning and identifying the enemy, but she had to balance reading maps with other miscellaneous tasks. This made her wonder how they had managed to get this far. Sophia continued to believe that all 3 of them had potential, and their ease in passing this level was proof of that. There's no doubt they really have potential. They just need a little more daring and courage to turn things around in their favor. But operating as a mid-level expedition team, as they currently do, this squad has no future. They have the capability, but the dragon wing that once aspired to glory on the front lines is no more. They simply don't have enough strength to defeat a floor-level boss. While this might sound rude, the truth is this team is severely lacking in power. Later at the Dragon Wing's house, Kronos, Melis, Nikor, and Sophia were having dinner together. Melis asked if Nikor was the one cooking today and pointed out that she had forgotten to remove the carrot stems. Nikor quickly apologized while Kronos laughed and said that Nikor was sometimes a little clumsy. He also told Melis that carrot stems were probably nutritious and she should try them, but Melis yelled that she would never eat them, which made Kronos laugh. Sophia sadly thought that it seemed like none of them were really trying to lift the team spirit. It was exhausting to always have to endure this heavy atmosphere. Kronos smiled and asked the girls what they thought if they considered adding more members to the group. He said that by focusing too much on recovering from injury, he had forgotten one thing. They were still a top-tier team, and if they post job openings, there will be no shortage of people wanting to join. Then they can return to the front lines once again. Nikor asked him how many more people he planned to recruit. Kronos replied that, well, having more support staff would certainly be helpful. Perhaps they should hire a few dozen people. He began thinking about how to meet those people, then added that because the current team was all female, they could become targets for those with bad intentions, which made things more difficult. He turned to Melis and asked what she thought about it, which embarrassed her. Kronos smiled while Sophia thought to herself that this was typical of him. He always liked to control things that way. Melis stammered that if it were her, she'd be fine if Kronos was the only male in the team, and she'd feel more at ease if the newcomers were all female. Sophia continued to think and said that this was yet another problem for the team. Currently, the relationships within the team are complicated. Melis likes Kronos, Nikor also likes Kronos, and Kronos has feelings for both of them. If more girls join the crew, there's a high chance Kronos will set his sights on someone else. It's no surprise that Nikor is looking unhappy. Then Sophia called out to Kronos, who asked if she was all right. Sophia explained that she thought it was better to be more cautious about expanding the team. Financial issues, as well as the fact that none of them had experience managing a large group. Kronos then said that if she thought so, she should have just said outright from the start that it couldn't be done. And then the whole team should just do what they could and keep pushing forward. Sophia protested, saying that she didn't mean it that way, but before she could finish, Kronos looked straight at her and asked if he was wrong.